In the 10th video of our series on Christianity, we come to one of my favorite topics, metaphysics. I found it necessary to pause this series of videos because, upon reaching the metaphysical dimension of the subject, I realized that my understanding was not yet complete. My thoughts were still in the process of formation, and I was not satisfied with their level of clarity. While my thinking is influenced by various philosophers and religious thinkers throughout history, what I present here is ultimately my own interpretation. It includes ideas that, to my knowledge, have not been articulated elsewhere and began as personal reflections developed privately. At this point, however, I am satisfied with the progress I have made over the past few months. I have managed to connect threads of thought that previously felt intuitive but lacked clear expression. Although this framework is far from finished, and there remains much that could be expanded or refined, it represents, for now, my tentative position on the metaphysics of religion. Today, the dominant worldview held by most physicists and scientists is grounded in materialism, or more precisely, physicalism, which is really just a more refined version of the same old materialism. It's human nature to follow the crowd. The dominant worldview has a powerful pull, especially on new minds, because, for the most part, people are social creatures. We do not want to be excluded from the herd, and in a way, we could say that people are afraid to think for themselves. Sometimes they even think they're not intelligent enough to confront some issues and question the mainstream. I used to think like that myself. I would ask, who am I to speak when so many brilliant people are saying the same thing? It must be true, right? And even if it isn't, who am I to oppose it? Am I really smart enough to prove otherwise? My answer back then was, no, I'm not smart enough, and honestly, that answer still stands. I still don't think I'm smart enough, but there's one realization I've had that changed everything. I came to believe that I'm not the only one who's too stupid to explain these things. We all are. The human mind simply isn't capable of answering some of the deepest questions. And when you add to that our herd instincts, our psychological need to fit in, and the prestige of the dominant worldview, we become even less capable of thinking clearly. Scientific theories should be questioned, not blindly accepted. Science isn't rooted in knowledge, it's rooted in ignorance. If we had knowledge, we wouldn't need science in the first place. Science exists because we don't know, so, in a way, science and ignorance are one and the same. Once I understood that science is a product of ignorance, and I already knew that I myself was ignorant, I realized I'm actually qualified to be part of this conversation. Because if anyone had the real answers, there'd be no need for science at all. My biggest objection to materialism or physicalism is that it's completely disconnected from lived reality, from life itself. There are two kinds of worldviews that every philosophy falls into. It is one that accepts life, makes it the source of everything, and one that rejects life, or takes it as an anomaly, nothing more than an accident. First kind speaks about both matter and meaning, while the other kind speaks only about matter. Every philosophy of this first kind, the kind that accepts life as necessary, is closer to truth than the other kind that makes life an accident. Because clearly there is life, but how we came to conclusion that it is an accident, in my view, it is not an accident, it is just what needs to be, it is part of nature. You can't have nature that accidentally produced life, because life is nature. The word reality already contains life. Life is not a product of reality, it is reality. I believe that matter is just one aspect of reality. It is how reality looks like. Every object, every shape, every number has a meaning behind the symbols that we see, just like every human body has behaviors, thoughts, and feelings hidden behind the looks. This is where life is. It is what makes the looks possible. The behind the looks comes before the looks. We are becoming estranged from the meaningful aspect of reality, the living aspect, and we reduced it to just the shell, to how it looks like. This is why there is a problem in explaining consciousness, because how can we describe the taste of ice cream? We can detect in the brain, in matter, superficial electrical signals, but this can't show us the experience of tasting ice cream. There is a disparity between the electrical signals and the taste, because the electrical signals are how reality looks like, while the taste, the experience, or life, is what reality is. Observations are something we produce. They're not the product of some independent, external reality. They're a product of conscious experience. And yet, the physicalist worldview completely ignores this. It treats the world as something separate from us, as if our being alive has nothing to do with the nature of reality. In materialism, everything is fragmented, everything is in pieces. We are all seen as separate individuals, disconnected from one another, living in our heads. We're cut off from nature, which is seen as nothing more than the background environment we happen to inhabit. The universe becomes this vast, empty expanse of meaningless space with some rocks floating around, and life is reduced to just one more rock among many. Nothing has purpose, nothing has reason, things are just happening, as if that's normal. In this view, life is nothing special, being alive or being dead. It makes no difference, it's all just rocks. Materialism paints life as a constant struggle against the outside world for our own survival. But the opposite is true. To struggle against the world is to struggle against ourselves. Because in truth, we are all connected through life. The entire universe is one big organism, and to harm any living being means to harm the whole. The well-being of the world is at the same time our own well-being. The well-being of another person is also our own well-being. When a family experiences a loss, everyone in that family suffers, not just because they were emotionally attached, but because they are literally, physically connected. They share the same space, the same atmosphere, the same reality. When we harm nature, we're not simply damaging the place we live, we're damaging ourselves, not metaphorically, but literally, we are nature. Our habitat is not something outside of us. It is us. The tree outside my house is just as much a part of me as my arm or my leg. That may not be immediately obvious. Losing an arm causes far more immediate pain than losing a tree, but that doesn't mean the tree's loss has no effect on me. If the tree produces air or fruit, and you cut it down, there is less air, less nourishment. That means the tree was part of my life, part of me. If we can affect one another in any way, it means we are connected by something. But if everything really happened only inside our own heads, as materialism suggests, how would it be possible to influence anyone or anything outside of ourselves? The fact that we do affect each other proves we are connected, we live in the same reality, and if reality is shared, then it is not something separate from us, it is us. Without reality, we would not exist, which means that reality and self are not two things. Reality is our life, and we are reality. In the modern materialistic worldview, this is far from obvious, but in truth, it is the most obvious thing of all. Materialism inverts the truth. It doesn't just miss the mark, it turns everything upside down. It doesn't even come close to what is real, and I don't believe it has the potential to be true. I'm not a physicist, but I've read some physics. I've tried to understand things in the simplest way possible, and from what I've gathered, materialism cannot be true. It's almost impossible to miss this. It should be clear to everyone. I don't understand why so many physicists are still immersed in the language of physical conditions and material fluctuations, when these things are clearly not the essence of reality. They are just the surface. They are something to observe, yes, but not something on which the existence of life itself is founded. I might be wrong, and I don't want to pretend otherwise. I'm very critical of opinions in general, including my own, and I think you should be skeptical of mine too. But this is one of those topics where, for now, all we have are opinions. Who knows if we'll ever reach a point where we can be 100% certain about these things. Personally, I don't believe the full truth about reality and life will ever be completely resolved. I think reality is of such a nature, and our position within it is such, that total knowledge will always remain out of reach. I like to use the analogy that's stuck in my mind from the teachings of Baha'i faith. They say that we can't know what is in heaven as long as we are on earth, because being on earth is like being a child inside the mother's womb. I often use this analogy to point at our inability to describe God, and I also realized that the same can be said of reality itself. We will never describe reality in its fullness, because, just like the child, we are inside the womb, and reality is our mother. Can a child describe its mother while it is in the womb? Is the same as asking, can we describe reality while living within it? I believe the answer is obvious. We can't. Knowledge is always fighting ignorance, but our condition as human beings is one of permanent limitation. There will always be some degree of ignorance we can't escape. Yes, we gain insights, we reduce our ignorance, but the truth itself is something too vast, too deep, to ever be fully grasped by a finite, mortal mind. So in a strict sense, we don't have true knowledge, we only have opinions. Some of those opinions may come closer to knowledge, others may drift further away. But opinions are inevitable. They are the only way we can even attempt to approach knowledge, given our human condition. As Plato put it, opinion is the medium between knowledge and ignorance. So, with that in mind, let me continue sharing my opinion. I believe that life cannot be explained through purely material conditions. This is why I see materialism as not just flawed, but as the very opposite of truth. And I believe that accepting such a worldview can do great harm, because it leads us into false beliefs, and false beliefs often end up working against us. When we believe in something that directly contradicts the nature of truth, we inevitably clash with truth itself, and that harms both life and reality. Truth is reality, and life is reality. If we believe that reality is lifeless, inert, dead, then our beliefs will start to turn against life itself. We will begin to act in ways that deny and damage the very thing we are, living beings. That's why I believe we shouldn't try to explain life from matter. We should do the reverse. We should try to understand matter through life. We can't escape life. We spend every moment of our existence within it. If someone tells me that a reality exists outside of life, I would say, prove it, and they couldn't. Because every proof, at all times, takes place within lived experience, within life. Everything we know and everything we experience always happens through life. Reality isn't a place where life randomly happens. Reality is the happening of life itself. Without life, there is no reality. There are many metaphysical systems that begin with life as their foundation and build their understanding of reality from that point. My favorite, and in my view, the most plausible and most self-evident, is idealism. Idealism asserts that mind is primary, and through mind, or consciousness, or the soul, we must seek to understand reality. Because if mind lies at the foundation of reality, then reality itself is alive, and that changes everything. This metaphysical system, idealism, recognizes unity, elevates life, and promotes connection, love, and peace. In contrast, materialism leads us to value self-centeredness and disconnection. It mistakes hostility for strength and survival, and instead of uplifting life, it glorifies death. Reality is seen as dead, and life becomes nothing more than an accidental byproduct, an anomaly. But in idealism, at least how I personally see it, survival is not a battle between isolated creatures, it is a shared effort. Animals provide nourishment for each other. Plants sustain animals with oxygen and food. Water quenches thirst. The sun, the soil, the air, each natural process plays a role in sustaining the whole. Because in this view, life is not something that happens within reality. Life is reality. If life were to perish, reality itself would collapse with it. Materialism flattens this truth. In its framework, being alive is barely distinguishable from being dead. But those who hold this view often don't even recognize the implications. They argue that their own personal satisfaction is of more value than contributing to something far greater than themselves, life itself, the reason we exist, the ground of all values, the possibility to value anything at all, which means it is above valuable. Modern ideologies don't recognize this truth. This is why, in their core, they promote selfishness and are opposed to life. They don't see reality as one big life that sustains itself. They see themselves as alive, and reality, and everything that is a part of it, as their opponent they need to fight for survival. In truth, it is the opposite. Reality is us. It is what keeps us alive. It is not something to struggle against. It is something we need to align with. To struggle against it means to struggle against one's own well-being. We are not in competition with others for survival. We are working together with each other for the continuation of life as a whole. To quote the Gospel of John, we love because he first loved us. If anyone says, "I love God," but hates his brother, he is a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And we have this commandment from him: whoever loves God must love his brother as well. Therefore, it is clear to me that compared to the continuation of life as a whole, across time and generations, me as a single passing manifestation am insignificant. When we see animals kill each other, we often view it through a materialistic lens. We perceive cruelty because we see life as a struggle of isolated individuals, each protecting their own self-interest. But that view is deeply flawed. In truth, when a lion kills a zebra, it is not out of hatred or malice. It is a form of service to life. The zebra, in its death, makes the ultimate sacrifice for the continuation of another life. This is not barbarity. It is beauty. It is love in its rawest, most primal form, love as sacrifice. At its root, love is sacrifice. We all sacrifice ourselves for the things we truly value. And the highest thing we can value, the most sacred goal, is to contribute to that which is above all other values: life itself, reality itself. Love is the source of life, because it is the only thing that allows us to sacrifice ourselves for others. When parents love their children, they willingly sacrifice their own lives, their time, their comfort, for the sake of their children. That is love. When a husband loves his wife, he does not love her because she brings him pleasure. That idea belongs to the distorted materialistic worldview, which reduces love to mutual exploitation. True love is revealed in the willingness to suffer for the beloved, to give without asking in return. Only these kinds of relationships endure, the ones built on shared sacrifice, on the genuine willingness to share one's life with another. Soren Kierkegaard writes in Works of Love, "With respect to love, we speak continually about perfection and the perfect person. With respect to love, Christianity also speaks continually about perfection and the perfect person. Alas, but we men talk about finding the perfect person in order to love him. Christianity speaks about being the perfect person who limitlessly loves the person he sees. That is selflessness, not pretending to be selfless while secretly seeking reward, but truly seeing the well-being of another as your own, because you understand that you are not separate, you are one." Materialism cannot grasp this. It frames love not as the act of sacrificing for our loved ones, but as making others sacrifice for us. It calls this love, but in truth, it is selfishness wearing a mask. A worldview that promotes disconnection and competition will never understand love, because love is connection, love is unity, love is life sharing itself with itself. In my understanding of the universe, love is selflessness. But in a materialistic view of reality, love is selfishness, something we feel for those who benefit us, because we see ourselves as isolated individuals, struggling for survival against others. Love, in that context, becomes transactional. We love others because of what they offer us. But in a world where we all live for one another, where life is unified rather than divided, love takes on its truest form. We don't love others for how they serve our lives. We love them because we wish to serve theirs. And when love is real, that love is returned, this mutual giving is not weakness. It is the engine of life itself. Life continues through sacrifice. Every living being gives of itself so that others may go on. At the root of all this sacrifice stands God, the ultimate and eternal sacrifice. God gives himself endlessly for the sake of all life. Soren Kierkegaard writes, "As the calm lake stems from the deep spring that no eye saw, so too a person's love has a still deeper ground in God's love. If there were no gushing spring at the bottom, if hard were not love, then neither would there be the little lake nor either a person's love. As the calm lake stems darkly from the deep spring, so a person's love originate mysteriously in God's. As the calm lake indeed invites you to contemplate it, yet with the darkness of the reflection prevents you from seeing through it, so does love's mysterious origin in God's love prevent you from seeing its ground. When you think you see it, it is a reflection that deceives you, as if what only hides the deeper ground were itself the ground. This is why God's love is infinite, because it sustains everything. Nothing in existence can compare to it. It is the foundational force behind all that lives, and the least we can do in return is love one another as He loves us, by sacrificing for each other, ensuring that life may continue for generations to come. As long as life continues, we continue, because we are not separate, we are all one, bound together through reality, through God. Every living being, in its own way and according to its own ability, contributes to God's work by helping others survive. In doing so, each one of us returns a portion of God's love back to Him, not through words, but through action, through love expressed as sacrifice. God gives us life because He loves us. He provides everything in His power to support our growth, our existence, our search for meaning. Every animal, every plant knows this truth without question. Each one is grateful to the rest of creation that supports its life. Only we, human beings, fail to see it. We believe something is missing. We blame God for the suffering and evil in the world. But we are blind to the truth. This world is the one we asked for, and God gave it to us out of love. But we are too proud, too selfish to see the gifts we've been given. Even when all that we asked for is placed before us, we reject it. We are the only beings deceived by the devil, tricked into turning away from love, from gratitude, from truth. And that deception is the source of our confusion, our delusion, our suffering. The world is not full of evil because God made it that way. It is full of evil because we refuse to see the love that surrounds us, the love God constantly offers. If we could see clearly, beyond the surface of this material existence where each individual fights for survival, we would understand why the devil is among us, why we empower him, and why he wouldn't be here without our illusions about the true nature of reality. There is nothing inherently wrong with the desire to survive, but this desire, rooted in ignorance of our deeper nature, blinds us to the truth. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. If we could fully grasp this, we would live in a blissful harmony, unburdened by the illusions that fuel suffering and evil. In the presence of God, there is no evil because God sees reality as it truly is. God knows that He is nature, encompassing all existence. The devil holds no power over God because God's vision is pure, free from the distortions of ignorance. This clarity is the source of God's knowledge, goodness, and infinite love. The devil, on the other hand, thrives on ignorance and illusion, but where there is no illusion, there is no devil. These are the metaphysical foundations of reality, and they are often misunderstood. Metaphysics isn't some magical invention of human thought. It is the unseen structure upon which all existence stands. Imagine building a magnificent palace. Before the walls, towers, and domes rise, there must be a foundation, a hidden, uncelebrated ground that makes the palace possible. Once the palace is complete, people marvel at its beauty, yet the foundation remains invisible, forgotten, though without it, the entire structure would collapse. Metaphysics is like that foundation. It is the ground of nature itself, supporting all that is visible and experienced, yet remaining hidden and often overlooked. Recognizing this requires a profound shift in perception. It is not something easily explained with words, as we are so immersed in the palace of appearances. To understand this, one must realize the obvious, that everything we perceive, everything we know, must stand on some kind of ground that supports it. It all rests upon something deeper, something unseen but essential. This realization is also the key to understanding God and the devil. What atheists do not understand is that believing in God is simply belief that we exist, that there is something that exists. Hebrew word for the name of God Yahweh literally means to be, or to exist. God is not one being among many. God is to be. He is at the same time all beings at once, and yet none of them at the same time. To be is not one thing among many. It is what allows things to be. It transcends mere being because it is what makes being possible. It is everywhere and yet nowhere in particular. Obeying commandments and living in accordance with God's will simply means living in a way that supports the well-being of yourself and of all things that exist. Because you exist, and to fight against existence is to fight against your own well-being. Truth is all that exists, and lies are the opposite. God is the source of existence and truth, and the devil is the source of lies. Lies are simply words, thoughts, or beliefs that are in contradiction with existence or reality. If you say you will come at 4, but you come at 5, you lied, because your statement is in contradiction with reality. God spoke and light came into being. The reality is God's word, and lies are the opposite. This is why lies are harmful, because to lie means to struggle against reality and against our own well-being. If we have mistaken beliefs, it means that the devil deceived us, and these mistaken beliefs will eventually harm us, because our actions according to those beliefs are in contradiction with reality, with life, and with God's word, which is the truth. When our beliefs are in contradiction with truth, our actions start to struggle against the true nature of existence. If we can't see that love is sacrifice, and that the nature of reality is such that God sacrifices himself for everything, so that everyone can live, and that we must do the same if we want to live a good life meaning aligning our beliefs and actions with God's word, which is at the same time reality and truth. If our actions do not align with God's word, we start acting in a way that does not align with the true nature of reality, and this is why we start struggling against the truth, against reality, and against life, because all these things are synonymous with each other, and we are a part of them. Jesus understood this truth completely, not in the superficial way many imagine today, but in its deepest, most profound sense. He's not just teaching us how to live. He always speaks through the understanding of reality to its most basic principles. As Jesus says, "On that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Whoever has my commandments and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and reveal myself to him." So pay attention what this means. I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. This is possible only if there is only one God and everything is within him, and as the source of everything he is in everything. As we said, the truth is God's word, and just as God loves us, we are called to love him by obeying his commandments, which means obeying his word, obeying the truth, and the truth, or God's word, is reality, which means living in accordance with the true nature of reality. The answer to this is love. And just as the Father loves us, we are called to love him in return, and we show this by loving each other just as God loves us, as that last part of the previous quote says, and we have this commandment from him: whoever loves God must love his brother as well. The greatest Christian thinkers, like Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, interpreted Christianity and God in relation to the nature of reality, to real-life events, not magical lands or fairy tales. They took a more mysterious tone only when they wrote about the afterlife, because afterlife is something we cannot know about, which is what both of them acknowledged. In my interpretation of reality, we are thinking beings, living in a mental existence. Our minds are not our brains, they are our souls, the essence of who we are. The three philosophers who influenced me the most in the metaphysical sense, Plato, Arthur Schopenhauer, and Bishop George Berkeley, each articulate reality as a single mind, or soul that is the ground of all being. I should also add Gottfried Leibniz, especially his treatise Monadology, which strongly influenced my beliefs about relationship between each individual soul, reality, and God. There is a lot of nuance between them. Each of them has their own way of articulating this truth, but the core of what I want to capture is there. Each of them presents a metaphysical system that rests on a single source, where mind and soul is primary lens through which we explain reality. For Schopenhauer, this is the will. For Berkeley, this is God. For Leibniz, this is the highest monad, who is synonymous with God. For Plato, this is the highest form, or as it is translated in English, the good. In Neoplatonism it is called the One. In my own thought, I unify these perspectives. Reality is God's will, and forms are the eternal ideas within the mind of God. The reality, all objects within it, and each soul reflects God's thoughts, Just like in Plato's philosophy, objects reflect the forms, and just like in Leibniz's monadology, each soul or monad reflects the supreme monad or God. God is the one who is more real than reality, and it all emanates from him. Everything that exists is a lower expression of God's ability to cast light of the mind into nothingness. Thus from nothing creates everything with his ability to think. I should point out that I use words like emanates and creates in the same sentence. Some people would say this is a contradiction, because emanation, like in Neoplatonism, is not the same as creation, as in Christianity. But I see it like this. God is the source of light. He emanates with light. God's throne is the brightest point of reality. It is so bright that it transcends light itself. This light that emanates from God is God's power, and by casting this light into nothing, God, with the bright power of his will, creates everything. Therefore, reality is not synonymous with God. Reality is God's word, or God's will, but at the same time reality is God in a way that it comes from him. I like to use the analogy of the dream. Imagine that dream is reality. When you dream, you are not your dream. It is your creation. It is a product of your mind. But at the same time, you are the dream for that same reason, because the dream is happening within your mind. But you, or your mind, is the emptiness where reality appears. It is the source of the dream. It is the ground that makes it possible. If you are familiar with Hermeticism, you know that many church fathers believed that Hermetic philosophy is not in contradiction with Christianity, and they adopted many so-called revelations of Hermes Trismegistus. This philosophy also influenced my thinking, and my view of Christianity and its metaphysics is not Hermetic specifically, but it is very similar. When we look deeper, I personally believe that both Hermeticism and Christianity are in some way forms of Platonism. Plato had the greatest impact on religions and philosophies of the Western world, to the point that all Western religions can be seen as a form of Platonism, and all philosophy after Plato is either a form of Platonism or it stands against it, and even these that stand against him are influenced by him. Plato's philosophy is not just one philosophy among many. His philosophy became the space where all other ideas after him took place. As Alfred North Whitehead said, the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. I also drew influence from famous psychologist Carl Jung, for I believe that his theory of archetypes and collective unconscious fits my beliefs on the nature of reality and human psyche. But my greatest influence is Plato, who was influenced by Pythagorean and Orphic philosophies that came before him. All of these systems have influenced Christianity. We could say they are its roots, as they in some way created the path of ideas that eventually gave birth to Christianity. The supreme God or mind, the idea of the Trinity, punishment for primeval sin, these ideas existed long before Christianity. For this video, we will mostly focus on the idea of supreme mind, or God, as the ground on which we will build our theory of reality, as God's ability to think, to create, gives him the power to will everything into nothing. Only in mind can everything appear out of nothing, as mind has the ability to think and create new ideas. Thought is the source of all reality. This is why it is called idealism. Everything is idea or thought. Plato is the first idealist philosopher in Western thought, at least the first one who wrote it down as far as we know in the history of Western philosophy. So to understand idealism, we must first understand Plato, for all idealist philosophers that came after him are in some way variations of his ideas. At least this is how I see it. At the core of his philosophy is the belief that concepts, or forms, are more real than the material objects that reflect them. Everything in the physical world is an imperfect copy of eternal, unchanging ideas that exist beyond space and time. For Plato, the universe is not a lifeless mechanism. It is a living, ensouled being. We as individuals are small fragments of this vast world soul. Each soul, in its journey, strives toward the good, the ultimate source of all reality and the source of all forms. Not all forms are equal. Some hold greater importance in shaping reality and exert a stronger pull on the soul. At the lower end of this hierarchy are forms like those of abstract objects, like perfect tables, houses, or mathematical objects such as triangles and squares. This shouldn't be seen as some kind of literal space where triangles and numbers are floating in the air. When Plato points to the ideas of shape or number, he is actually saying that they literally exist. But when we think of literally exist, we imagine some kind of space where objects are located. For Plato, numbers and shapes have no quantitative value. They are not instantiated, which means they exist as pattern, or it is even better to say, meaning. This meaning is what the shapes are. They are not literally physical shapes. They have no physical shape. They are without shape. Yes, shapes are without shape. You must imagine a shape not as a thing, but as pure meaning. This meaning cannot be captured with sight because it is not visible. It is pure meaning without any quantitative expression. This is why it can only be seen with the eye of the mind. However, in material world, each object reflects these perfect ideas, or meanings. From the mind of God they are reflected as face is reflected in a mirror, and this reflection gives the material objects their existence. Material objects are fleeting expressions of meanings and patterns that are eternally present in this realm of pure intellect. These are still part of the eternal realm of forms, but they do not carry the same metaphysical weight as the higher forms that deal with moral perfection. The higher forms, beauty, justice, temperance, courage, are central to Plato's vision of the soul's journey. Everything in the world participates in the forms to some degree. Every object, and even the universe itself, strives to embody or imitate these higher forms. A beautiful body, for instance, is beautiful because it partakes in the eternal form of beauty. But this beauty is not generated by the body. It comes from a higher, eternal source, from the good itself, which is the highest form and the source of all others. As the soul naturally strives toward the good, and beauty is among the forms closest to it, the soul is also drawn to what is beautiful. Plato himself says, "What is good is beautiful, and what is beautiful is good." However, since physical beauty depends on the material world, it is subject to change, decay, and disappearance. All material things are in flux. They cannot be truly real in the fullest sense. They are only imitations of the unchanging, eternal reality of the forms. The soul, on the other hand, is eternal. It is the soul that brings life to the body and allows us to come into contact with the forms. Therefore, true beauty cannot reside in outward appearances, which fade, but in the soul itself. True beauty is the soul's capacity to reflect the forms, especially goodness and virtue, in the world, while bodies, objects, and even the world may appear beautiful for a time, that beauty will eventually pass. Yet the form of beauty itself remains unchanged. It exists independently of the material world. Even if the entire cosmos were destroyed, beauty would persist, eternal and perfect. And if a new world were to arise after 1,000 years, it too would reflect beauty in its own imperfect way, because beauty is always there, timeless and universal. All beautiful things are merely imperfect copies of beauty itself. Another crucial form is justice, which, alongside temperance, courage, and prudence, makes up the four cardinal virtues in Plato's thought. These are not just moral ideals. They are metaphysical realities, because the soul strives toward the good, and each form ultimately flows from the good. We aim to embody these virtues in our lives. Every legal system, in some way, seeks to achieve justice. This striving implies that justice is real, not in the way physical objects are real, but as an ideal, something transcendent. Justice, in this deeper sense, cannot be fully captured, defined, or explained. It must be lived, embodied directly in the soul. It has no quantitative features like objects and bodies do. It possesses no shape, size, smell, or color. Yet despite lacking any material attributes, justice is undeniably experienced through our thinking and our living. Plato teaches that life, and the soul, resembles the forms. Just as each material object participates in the form of beauty, each soul participates in the form, or idea of life. This is also a great observation by Plato that influenced my thinking. Just like all material objects are copies of true ideas, our material life or bodily existence is a copy of the true source or idea of life. Life itself is an idea in the mind of God. Just like beauty of material world fades, but its source, the beautiful, remains eternal. In the same way, each individual life fades, body dies, but life as a whole continues, because life, just as beauty, has its eternal source in the mind of God. The soul exists on a higher plane, within the realm of thought. Because it can contemplate the forms, it is able to recognize their expressions in the material world. For this reason, thought must govern matter, and the soul must govern the body. Therefore, justice, like all forms, courage, beauty, even mathematical ideas like shapes and numbers, in our earthly lives can only appear as an imperfect imitation, our attempt to live it, express it, and embody it within the limits of material existence. This is the essence of Plato's vision. The forms are eternal ideals, and our world, with all its flaws, is constantly reaching toward them. Though we may never grasp them fully, the soul's effort to imitate them is what brings meaning to life. Plato's Republic, one of his most well-known works, carries the subtitle on justice. It is often misread as a political treatise, leading many to interpret it as a defense of authoritarianism or rigid hierarchy, but this reading misses the heart of the work. Republic is not primarily about political systems. It is about the soul and justice. All political systems are subjected to the rules of justice, because, if they wish to live well, which obviously everyone wishes for, because, as we said, each soul strives towards the good, the source of everything. The city, or polis, is used as an analogy for the soul. The citizens represent the parts of the soul, and justice, in this context, is not about laws or punishments, but about how the soul embodies harmony, order, and the good. To embody justice is to bring the soul, and by extension society, into alignment with the natural order. In the just city, each person does what is proper to their nature and their role in the whole. They do not obsess over status, over who is above or below them. Instead, each contributes in the way that best serves the harmony of the whole. This mirrors how life itself functions. Every living organism gives itself to the whole, and in turn is sustained by that whole. Life is sustained by sacrifice and reciprocity. It is through giving that the organism finds its place, and through the whole that it finds support. A truly just society mirrors this principle. Rulers do not govern through domination, but through service. Their authority is not for personal gain, but for the good of all. There is no private wealth or ownership in Plato's ideal city. Everything is shared, because life, by its very nature, is communal. Justice, then, is not a distant object we must discover. It is not hidden in some other dimension. Justice is something to live. It is not a concept to be understood only with reason, but a reality to be embodied through life. To live justly, we must come into contact with our soul. The soul is not an object. It is not something we can point at or see. It is the very source of our being. It is what makes experience possible. Plato wants us to turn our attention away from the material world, not to reject it, but to awaken to the deeper reality within us. Only by doing this can we come into contact with the forms. The forms are not things in a physical place. They are not located somewhere in space or time. They are lived realities. Justice is not a place. It is a state of being. We cannot point to it or hold it. Like existence itself, justice cannot be described in material terms. We do not encounter it with our senses. We embody it through how we live. Plato says that the mind has an eye, not a literal, physical eye, but a faculty of vision rooted in comprehension, understanding, and contemplation. Just as our thoughts are not in a physical location, the forms are not in a place either. They are realities of the mind and soul. Our soul is our mind, and our thoughts do not reside in the world like objects. They are not seen or touched. They are lived. Thought is life. The soul is life. The forms are realities we experience through that life. This is why justice, although it cannot be grasped or located, is always present. It is nowhere in particular, yet everywhere. It does not exist in the way material things exist, and yet it is more real than anything material. Justice is not something to acquire or to capture. It is something to embody, something to be, across all lifetimes, through all births and deaths. Justice remains, waiting to be lived, waiting to be realized within each soul. When Plato turns to geometry and mathematics, he does not do so to escape the body or denounce the material world. He uses them as a guide, leading the reader inward, toward the soul, toward direct contact with life itself. Geometry offers a glimpse of perfection, of order, and of eternal truth. It teaches the soul what it means to contemplate the forms. And from that contemplation, what it means to live the forms, to live justice, temperance, courage, and all the virtues that emerge from the good. The more a person reflects the forms through their life and actions, the closer they come to true fulfillment. Take the example of a craftsman. As he perfects his craft, his work becomes a clearer image of the perfect form that exists beyond this world. His soul, in turn, becomes more harmonized with the forms. This principle applies across life. The more our soul aligns with the form of justice, the more our actions embody justice. The more we understand the form of courage, the more courageous we become in our lives. However, these forms always remain beyond full human grasp in this mortal life. Only God, who is perfect and eternal, can fully know the forms. Even the most virtuous souls, those who come closest to God, still fall short of complete perfection. Our task, then, is to approach the forms as closely as our soul allows, living in accordance with their divine order as best we can. Plato believed that long before our bodies existed, our souls inhabited heaven, where they became directly acquainted with the forms. Real knowledge, for him, was knowledge of the forms. But since the forms do not exist in the physical world, we cannot learn about them through sensory experience. Instead, our knowledge of them must be a recollection of what our souls once knew before birth. Learning, in this view, is merely remembering. Immanuel Kant later echoed a similar idea within his idealist framework. He divided reality into the phenomenal world, which we perceive, and the noumenal world, which exists beyond our direct perception. Like Plato, he argued that we are born with a priori knowledge, categories that shape how we experience reality. We do not construct reality from mere sensory data. Rather, our minds are already structured to perceive the world in a particular way. Mind is everything. Though we all perceive the world through our individual senses, seeing the same sky, hearing the same sounds, and touching the same earth, this does not mean that reality exists solely within your mind or mine. Reality itself is mind. There is only one mind, and we merely receive its ideas. This is precisely what Plato taught. What we perceive are imperfect reflections of the perfect ideas that exist within the divine intellect, the mind of God. To acknowledge God is to acknowledge universals, Platonic forms, because God is their very embodiment. A truly transcendent God, the foundation of all being, must also be eternal, beyond all finite existence. This is the monotheistic God, not simply a being who is good, but goodness itself, not merely beautiful, but beauty itself, not simply just, but justice itself. Therefore, Platonic forms are eternally present within the divine intellect, the mind of God. From Plato's metaphysical vision emerged what is later known as Neoplatonism, or New Platonism. While it may appear to introduce new concepts, Neoplatonism is, at its core, simply a reinterpretation of Plato's metaphysics, using different terminology to clarify ideas that were already present in his dialogues. Some argue that Neoplatonism adds something novel to Plato's philosophy, but in truth it is not a departure. It is a continuation, an unfolding. The essential structure remains unchanged. Neoplatonism had a profound influence on early Christianity. Many of the Church Fathers drew heavily from Neoplatonic thought, weaving it into their theological frameworks. Perhaps the most important figure in this movement, and often considered the founder of Neoplatonism, is Plotinus, who offered very influential interpretation of Plato's metaphysics. Plotinus taught that the first principle of all reality is the One, a simple, ineffable source beyond all being and non-being. The One is not a being among beings. It transcends existence itself. It is unknowable, beyond all forms, all categories, and yet it is the origin of everything. It is the creative source of the universe and the final goal toward which all things strive. Plotinus often refers to this principle as the good, drawing from Plato's assertion in Republic that the good is beyond being in dignity and power. From this first principle, the One, emanates the nous, or divine intellect. The nous is the perfect image of the One. It is thought, being, and the archetype of all things. It is simultaneously idea and intellect, the realm of forms, the ideal world itself. Although it mirrors the One, it is also fundamentally distinct from it, because it is a second principle, a reflection, and not the source itself. The nous is the highest reality accessible to the human mind, and it plays a central role in Plotinus metaphysics. The nous, in turn, emanates the world soul. This soul is also immaterial, yet it stands between the perfect intelligible world of the nous and the changing, phenomenal world. Just as the nous relates to the One, the world soul relates to the nous, illuminated by it, but also capable of descending into the realm of time, change, and sensation. The soul connects the intelligible and the sensible. It remains, in essence, part of the divine order, but it also generates and animates the material world. Plotinus describes the world soul as one and unified, but within it exist countless individual souls. These souls can either remain oriented toward the nous, the divine intellect, and thereby live in accordance with the intelligible order, or they can turn away, becoming absorbed in the world of the senses and the finite. In doing so, they forget their true nature and lose their connection to the higher reality. As a living and moving principle, the soul gives rise to the phenomenal world. Ideally, this world should reflect the harmony of its source. The soul, as the animating force, should pervade all of nature in such a way that the whole remains in unity and order. The material world, when rightly understood, is not in opposition to spirit. It is its expression, its image. But when the soul forgets itself and identifies only with the lower, sensory world, disharmony and disintegration follow. In essence, Plotinus Neoplatonism is a metaphysical ascent, from the multiplicity of the material world through the unifying intellect of the nous, and ultimately back to the absolute simplicity of the One. It is a vision of existence as a layered emanation from a single, infinite source, and the task of the soul is to return to that source by recollecting its true origin and nature. Neoplatonism thus represents a pure form of idealism, even though the term itself did not exist in antiquity. Nonetheless, the essence of what we now call idealism is present in both Plato and the Neoplatonists. The view that all reality is grounded in soul or intellect. According to this perspective, existence is ultimately mind or spirit in nature. Plotinus, the central figure of Neoplatonism, was not a dualist in the way certain sects like the Gnostics were. He did not reject the material world or consider it inherently evil. On the contrary, he saw beauty and order in the cosmos. As long as the idea governs matter, or the soul governs the body, the world retains its goodness. It remains a reflection, albeit a dim one, of the higher intelligible realm. The differences between higher and lower realities are not marks of corruption, but part of a necessary hierarchy that brings harmony to the whole. However, in the actual phenomenal world we live in, that harmony often gives way to conflict and instability. Unity becomes fragmentation, and reality appears as a process of continual becoming and passing away, what Plotinus described as illusory existence. This disorder arises because the material world rests on matter, understood metaphysically as the indeterminate, that which has no qualities or form of its own. For Plotinus, matter without form is not just neutral, it is the potential for evil. Evil itself is not a positive force or substance. It is a privation, a lack. It has no true existence of its own, parahypostasis, but arises necessarily as part of the structure of the universe. In this way, Neoplatonists denied that evil has independent being. They likened it to darkness, which is not a substance in itself, but only the absence of light. So too, evil is merely the absence of good. The more something participates in being, the more it is real, the more it partakes of the good. Evil occurs only to the extent that something falls short of what it should be. This is a view I personally share. I understand evil as ignorance, our inability to see. We are blind to what is good, blind to the true light. And in our blindness, we mistake darkness for illumination, evil for good. This confusion is the root of all wrongdoing, misperceiving the false as true, the destructive as desirable. I also find in the Neoplatonic metaphysical structure a deep resonance with the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. The threefold division of the One, the Nous, and the world soul closely parallels the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The One is the ultimate source, the Absolute, the Father, beyond all being and all knowing. The Nous, or divine intellect, is the Logos, the rational principle that gives form and order to the cosmos. In my view, the Logos contains within it the Platonic forms, the eternal thoughts of God. The Gospel of John speaks of the Logos as being the Son, Christ. Paul also describes it as the Son, the image, and the form. Many scholars have even speculated that the Gospel of John was written by someone influenced by Platonic thought, given its profound metaphysical language and imagery. For St. Augustine, the Logos became flesh in Christ, in whom the divine reason was uniquely manifest. The world soul, in this analogy, corresponds to the Holy Spirit, the breath of life, the animating force through which God gives being to all living things. It is the channel through which souls receive their life and consciousness. In Plato's Timaeus, the demiurge, divine intellect, gives a soul to the cosmos, making it a living being. This soul, permeating all life, allows individual souls to experience and participate in reality. In this light, God is not merely the Father, the Son, or the Holy Spirit, but beyond all of them, while also being all of them at once. God is not a being among beings. He is the source of being. He is never identical with anything that exists, for all things come from him, but he himself is beyond existence. One of my favorite Christian theologians, who was also a Neoplatonist and had a profound influence on my view of Christianity, is Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. He taught that God is better approached through negations than through affirmations. In his apophatic theology, the Via Negativa, all names and representations of God must ultimately be denied. This is because God is beyond everything we can know or conceive. He has no attributes, no appearance, no definition, since all such things belong to the created world, and God is beyond the created order. We, who live within the bounds of creation, can never rise fully to the divine heights. God transcends all categories of thought and being. According to Pseudo-Dionysius, once all names are stripped away, what remains is divine silence, darkness, and unknowing. God, being beyond comprehension, appears to us as darkness, not because he lacks light, but because he is the source of all light. What looks like nothingness from our perspective is, in fact, the fullness of everything. To us, divine reality seems like darkness, but in truth, it is the brightest light, the wellspring of all life and illumination. What appears dark to us is actually the divine radiance, too overwhelming for our limited minds to grasp. Meanwhile, what we take to be light, our earthly knowledge and understanding, is merely a flickering candle in the wind, brief and fragile, soon extinguished and returned to the very darkness from which it came. That which appears to us as nothing is everything to God, and that which seems like everything to us is, in fact, nothing in comparison to the true divine reality. This Neoplatonic view had a deep impact on many early Christian thinkers, including one of the most important theologians in Christian history, Augustine of Hippo. Augustine is another major influence on my own understanding of Christianity, and he serves as perhaps the most significant link between Platonic philosophy and Christian theology. Before converting to Christianity, Augustine followed the dualistic religion of Manichaeism as a Manichaean. He believed that evil had substantial existence and that God was material. But when he encountered Neoplatonism, his views began to change. He came to see that material reality is not ultimate, and that God is not composed of matter. Drawing on Neoplatonic thought, Augustine embraced the idea that evil is not a substance, but a privation of good, a lack or corruption of what should be, rather than something with independent existence. He also came to understand the human being as a unity of body and soul. His favorite metaphor for this union was marriage. The soul and the body are joined together like husband and wife, while originally in harmony, after the fall of humanity, this relationship became conflicted. Augustine wrote of the body and soul as two fundamentally different kinds of things. The body is a three-dimensional object composed of the four elements, while the soul is without spatial dimension. Yet the soul is a kind of substance, capable of reason and meant to govern the body. Unlike Plato or Descartes, Augustine was not concerned with providing a detailed metaphysical explanation of the soul-body union. For him, it was enough to affirm that the two are metaphysically distinct, and that being human means being a composite of both. But the soul is superior to the body, and this view is grounded in his hierarchical classification of existence. First, things that merely exist, then those that exist and live, and finally, those that exist, live, and possess reason. Humanity, possessing all three, stands at a unique intersection of being. One of Augustine's most powerful insights, drawn from Plato, is that the soul does not come into existence at birth, but always was, because it comes from God. And as part of God, who is eternal, the soul too must be eternal. Augustine also placed Plato's forms within the eternal mind of God, interpreting them as divine ideas. In my personal view, without Plato, Christianity would be an entirely different religion. Yes, Plato was not a Christian, and there are elements of Christian doctrine, especially regarding the afterlife, that contradict his philosophy. But I believe Platonism is the true foundation of Christianity. The idea of a higher realm, the greatest good, the immortal soul as the source of life and mind, and the origin of moral truth, these are all deeply Platonic concepts. This does not mean that Christianity is merely a copy of Platonism. Rather, it shows that humanity has always been on a shared journey in search of truth. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, learning from their wisdom as they sought to understand God long before the birth of Christ. Some argue that Platonism is a pagan philosophy and should not be linked to Christianity, but this is misguided. The truth is universal, and we should celebrate the fact that Christianity and Platonism converge on many fundamental insights. This is not a weakness, but a testament to the continuity of humanity's search for the divine. All knowledge is interconnected, and every philosophy is influenced by those that came before it. This is how human thought evolves, through refinement and deeper understanding. We must understand that Christianity is not an entirely new religion. It is a synthesis of knowledge and traditions that already existed long before its emergence. The ideas from which Christianity was constructed were already part of Western philosophy and theology. The first Christians were Jewish, and prior to Christianity, Judaism had already developed the concept of a single, monotheistic God. Christianity builds upon this same foundational principle. In fact, the most basic teachings upon which the entire Christian religion is built, and roughly half of the Bible, Christianity's sacred text, are derived from Jewish teachings. At the time of Jesus, Judea was under Roman occupation. Roman culture, in turn, was heavily influenced by Greek civilization. These cultures, Jewish, Roman, and Greek, interacted and blended with one another, mixing their philosophies and religious traditions. Christianity emerged from this environment. It is not something entirely separate from it, but rather a new manifestation of that shared intellectual and spiritual heritage. It introduced its own symbols and interpretations, but its roots run deep into older traditions. This is why I keep returning to Plato. I believe his teachings had the greatest impact on the body of Western knowledge from which Christianity eventually arose. You cannot separate Christianity from Judaism, and you cannot separate it from the ancient pagan philosophies, because without these traditions, Christianity would have developed very differently, or perhaps not at all. Some people point out how the stories in the Bible mirror Greek mythology, or even earlier Egyptian and Mesopotamian myths, and they say this is a proof that Christianity is nonsense. But in my view, this is exactly the opposite. The more Christianity is connected to earlier religions, the more I believe in its truth. But not in a superficial, meaningless way in which the religious truths are often presented, but in an only meaningful way to determine whether something is valid or invalid, which is to look at it through the eyes of truth itself. There is only one truth, and everything that is true is included, which means that all religions, all sciences, all words at all times, are speaking about only one thing, and that is the truth. Christianity cannot be referring to something that other religions are not, and it can't speak about something that isn't the discussion of the sciences. Because all religions can't be about anything else, but about this one single thing called the truth. The only way to speak about something that is not true is to speak about the falsehood, but all religions claim they speak about truth, so they aren't speaking about falsehood. Now, whether they are true or not depends on the understanding of its practitioners, but my point still stands. They are all referring to the same thing, the truth. If earlier myths speak about the creation of the universe and Christianity also speaks about this truth, and if there is a possibility that universe came into existence at some point, it means that all myths that speak about this are pointing to this truth, which means we should not worry about which religion is true, but only about whether it is true or not. If the universe was created, it means that all myths and religions that speak about this are true, at least when it comes to this issue. Some religions are in conflict with others in certain domains, but it doesn't mean that they speak about different things. They all speak about truth, and in some domains they are true, in some they are not. Religion is not something that can be true or false. Only truth is true, and religion can align with it or not. Religions are not truth itself. They are a bunch of symbols pointing, or trying to align with the truth. All symbols and words require interpretation, and it is our interpretation of those symbols and our understanding that brings us in alignment with the truth. All religions can be true at the same time, if they are understood in a way that it aligns with the truth. This is, of course, so unlikely that it is almost impossible, but the possibility for that exists, and that is my point. Religion is not the truth. Religion is symbolic language that speaks about the truth. Truth can never be language, because truth is existence itself, and truth is expressed by existing, by living, not by speaking about it. People often mistake words for truth, and this is a big problem in our understanding. Words are true only when they align with reality, and they are false when they are in contradiction with reality. When we speak lies, our words are in contradiction with our actions and experiences. This means that all words of all times are not truth itself, but this realm of actions and experiences is what is true and real. Therefore, our understanding, that which guides our actions and experiences, is what matters, and it is what brings us in alignment with what is true. In ancient times, Christianity thrived because it was aligned with a specific metaphysical worldview, one that affirmed life and the existence of a higher order beyond the material. I believe Christianity began to lose its meaning when our worldview shifted toward materialism, which denies the soul and the sacred dimension of life. Now, I understand that Plato did not refer to his highest principle as God, but rather as the good. Still, he believed this principle was the source of everything, and that everything which comes from this source is alive. This is exactly how God is described in monotheistic religions, as the source of all that exists, not the entirety of existence itself, but the origin of it. To be the source of all creatures and all souls, God must possess within himself the essence of soul in order to give it. In this sense, if God is the source of all things, then everything proceeds from him and participates in him. Everything is in God, but God is not reducible to everything. He is the source, the fountainhead, the principle of life, and all life flows from him. God is not just one soul among many. He is above all souls. He is the source of the soul itself, the giver of soul to the world. This idea is expressed in Plato's Timaeus, where the demiurge, or divine craftsman, breathes a soul into the universe. The divine intellect, the nous, is higher than the world soul because it is the origin of it. In the same way, God's mind creates the world and all the souls within it. Therefore, God cannot be thought of as simply another soul among others. He is always above. He is not merely life. He is the source of life, which means that while God is life, he is also beyond life. Thinkers like St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas captured this idea when they described God as being itself, not a being, but the very necessity of being, the condition for anything to exist at all. And yet, Many modern Christians have absorbed a vision of God and the devil that is frankly absurd. Some believe that God is like a finite creature, behaving like a person in the way a human does, and that the devil is a sort of evil predator who dwells in some physical place, commanding demons that speak and act like small evil men, but this is not what the Bible teaches. You cannot read the Bible as if it were a literal fairy tale for children. Every word in the Bible is symbolic, but this is not unique to the Bible. All language is symbolic. Every word we speak points to something beyond itself, and interpretation is always required. Even fairy tales are not just clear surface-level narratives. They too require interpretation. So when we talk about literal and symbolic interpretations of the Bible, we are really talking about two forms of symbolic understanding. There is no such thing as a purely literal interpretation because even what we call literal is constructed through symbols, through language. Where, for example, does the Bible ever describe the devil as a red figure with horns? This kind of imagery does not come from the biblical text, but from a degraded symbolic imagination shaped by materialist assumptions. Christianity became a kind of fairy tale not because the Bible changed, or because language changed, but because our worldview changed. In the modern era, we interpret everything through a materialistic lens. When someone today hears that God is a person, they imagine a physical being standing in one place, thinking, speaking, reacting, as if God were a large human with superpowers. This is because we've been taught that the mind exists inside the brain, confined to a physical space. So to call someone a person, in our culture, is to say they are a finite, localized being. However, the problem with this view of reality is not that it has an absurd notion of God. The problem is that from this one single conclusion, that reality is made from stuff called matter, this one single idea shapes our understanding of everything. The entire structure of understanding is built on this knowledge, and if it is false, we will suffer because of it, because we will never be able to live according to our own nature. We will keep struggling against our own well-being. Carl Jung writes, instead of being at the mercy of wild beasts, earthquakes, landslides, and inundations, modern man is battered by the elemental forces of his own psyche. This is the world power that vastly exceeds all other powers on earth. The age of enlightenment, which stripped nature and human institutions of gods, overlooked the god of terror who dwells in the human soul. So let's stop criticizing materialism, its meaninglessness, and let's begin the construction of a map from the meaningful understanding of reality. Idealism, as a philosophy, directly opposes materialism. It holds that ideas and thoughts constitute the entirety of existence, with matter being a secondary effect, nothing more than a product of perception, which itself is born from the mind. This is how you need to imagine it. If you believe thoughts are abstractions and matter is concrete, reverse this. Try to imagine that thoughts and meanings are the concrete world from which reality is structured, and material objects are just a symbolic expression of these meanings. This does not mean that material reality does not exist. In fact, it gives material reality a proper, concrete existence. It is materialism that actually says material reality is less real than idealism. In materialism, events are not connected to anything that holds them together. What is done, and it has no specific purpose or weight. But in the realm of eternal meanings and patterns, each past event is as real as the next, because this realm of meanings is what reality is made of, and each event plays a meaningful role in constructing the reality we live in now. Yes, materialism also recognizes that past events bring us to the future, but in materialism, past events are gone. In this view of idealism, however, events are the living body of the universe, and in each present moment, all past moments are literally alive and happening at the same time. Because the physical past does not exist, there are only meanings, and the spirit of the past lives in the present. We don't take literal physical events, but the meanings and patterns that made those events possible, and these meanings of past events are still here, in this very moment. Past and present, space and time, are consequences of meanings and patterns that are eternal and present in all moments. They exist in the mind of God, and God transcends time and space. All time and all events are actually a single moment in the so-called abstract realm of ideas. For me, it is not abstract, because in my worldview, the material world is actually an abstraction. This is what I want to show in this video, which I call the metaphysics of religion. I want to show that symbols and meanings of religion point to the truth that is ever present, in every moment and in all places. This kind of archetypal expression of religious symbols is what Carl Jung, a psychologist that also greatly influenced my thinking, expressed with his theory of collective unconscious. The crucifixion of Christ is not an event in time. It is literally part of the living body of truth. It is everywhere, at all times, and it plays a role even now, at this very moment, in all places in the universe. This may be hard to understand, and it may seem counterintuitive or incoherent. A few years ago, if someone had told me this is the truth, I would probably have said they were crazy. But through years of thinking about the nature of reality through my experience, I have a strong conviction that this is the best explanation for reality. The main challenge in truly understanding this is to grasp the inversion I mentioned. What we call the abstract realm of ideas is actually concrete and persistent reality, while material reality is an abstraction. To understand this is to understand idealism. Numbers and shapes are a great example. How can two trees, or a mountain in a pyramid shape, exist if there is no number 2 or a shape of a pyramid? But number 2 and the shape of a pyramid are not some kind of entity. We shouldn't think about them as stuff that exists somewhere. We need to think about them as patterns and meanings that shape how physical reality looks. They are things that don't exist as things. They are more like energies or principles, like laws or language. They are the language through which God speaks, and what we see is a product or a text created with this language of meanings and patterns, like numbers and shapes. The shape of a pyramid is not an existent thing. It is an eternal pattern. Pyramid shape means something, and this meaning is real, and this is why things in material reality can take the shape of a pyramid. Number is the same. It is not a thing, but meaning, and this meaning makes it possible for two of any kind of object to exist in the material world. This is also how language works, which is a great parallel. The sounds and letters make no sense if they are not connected to meaning. What they mean is not placed in the physical world. It is a pattern that exists in the realm of ideas, and it applies in all circumstances, at all times, in the physical world. If a word were connected to a specific thing in the material world, it would make no sense. It would describe, let's say, one tree, and after a year, when encountering a different tree, it wouldn't be connected to the same object, because that tree is that specific tree we encountered years ago. But when the word is connected to the idea of a tree, then all trees of all time can be described with that word. A word is not a specific order of symbols or sounds. It is this pure realm of meaning. It is not a thing, nor anything that can be seen or touched. It is the realm of ideas. Ideas are what give meaning, and this realm of patterns is just a collection of ideas that we encounter with our minds or souls. God's language is, as we already said, reality itself, and since reality is constructed from ideas, our language is an imitation of God's language, and it allows us to connect and communicate our experiences, for all experiences are constructions of meaningful patterns that exist in the mind of God. Shapes and numbers are also this meaning in the realm of ideas. We can have different sounds and symbols to describe their meaning. And what is the material world? It is an abstraction that allows us to interpret and live in this realm of ideas and meaning. So when a mountain takes the shape of a pyramid, the meaning is real, the meaning of the shape of the mountain. What we call a mountain in the shape of a pyramid, that which we see with our eyes, is actually our way of interpreting this meaning that is instantiated in the mountain. And this meaning that is connected to the mountain can be connected to various different things in reality, and we will recognize them as abstractions of the underlying pattern of meanings and ideas that shape reality. So our perception of the mountain in a pyramid shape is an abstraction that represents the true realm of information that makes the mountain look like a pyramid. Thus, what we see is how the mountain looks like, while behind the looks, there exists this persistent mathematical realm of information that is experienced by souls that see the mountain. Mathematical information like the shape of the pyramid or number of trees on the mountain is just one single aspect of various kinds of meaningful patterns that make the mountain what it is. The mountain is much more complicated than just its shape, number, size, or texture. There is a kind of spectrum of all these qualities mixed together, perfectly balanced and experienced by each soul, and this is what the mountain truly is. It is an experiential reality. Without experience, there is no mountain. The soul must be there to absorb the information and receive the experience of mountain. The entire reality is experiential. It is alive, and it is this life that creates the information necessary for the existence of reality. Only a living mind can create a new non-existent information out of nothing. It must be intelligent. All souls see the same mountain because all souls share one universal intelligence, or mind, and each soul receives these same meaningful patterns from reality, living, perceiving, thinking, remembering. Everything is full of meaningful information, and this is the reason we think and why reality itself thinks, because it seems that reality is of such nature that it requires intellect to be real. Therefore, meanings are experienced as ideas. They are all synonymous in my philosophy. Meaning, experience, and idea, they are all the same thing in the mental world of idealism. So, this is important to remember, because in some instances I use them interchangeably. When I speak from the subjective perspective, I speak of experience. When I look at it from objective standpoint, I call them meanings and patterns. But all of these things are actually ideas in the divine mind, and what we call material reality is just a reflection of these ideas and experiences. Material reality has no permanent existence. Everything that happens is already over. Therefore, there must be something that endures, that makes all these events possible, and what is more important, something that connects these events in a meaningful way. We can clearly remember past events. These events are not over. They influence us and reality around us. They are completely merged with right now. But in a material world of abstractions, this is not obvious, because abstraction is over before it begins, while the meaningful aspect of reality, the ideas, are experienced outside of abstraction of time and space, and this meaningful pattern of experience is therefore always present in the moment, and we can reach it through our memory. So, if the world is also mental, it is not just us who have memories, it is the entire reality, and these memories are what makes the present, which in material world is just an abstract now, while in the experiential realm it is ever present. When you really think about it, the experience of the world makes much more sense when seen through this lens. Materialism can't explain thoughts. It says that thoughts are inside our heads. Each of us supposedly has the entire surroundings in our heads. When I look at a tree, there is a replica of the tree in my head that is created by my brain. And what's even more ridiculous is that we don't even know where this tree is located in our heads. If you cut my brain open, you can't find a small tree inside. So what is the difference? How do we experience the tree in my worldview? In my worldview, the tree is experienced through meanings and patterns that are produced by this realm of ideas, and we are participating in it. When I see the tree, it is not in my head. It is outside, exactly where it stands. In my worldview, the mind is not located in the brain. Mind, or the world soul, is life itself, and it is the entire reality. Reality is alive. It is a living being, and we are just parts within it. There is no me and the outside world. I am the outside world. My brain has no inside. My brain is the outside world. My brain, just like the entire material reality, is just an image. It is how reality looks like. But what reality is, it is the mental realm of ideas. So when we see things around us, what we see is just an image of ideas. It is how ideas look like when observed. It is like the screen on a computer. Everything we see on the screen is actually processor of the computer processing a bunch of numbers, 1 and 0. So how it is that we don't see a bunch of 1s and 0s on the screen? It is because 1 and 0 is like an idea in the real world, while what we see on the screen is how that information looks like. The image on the screen is not the information. It is just how information looks like when processed and seen through the screen of perception. I have no need to replicate the tree in my head to be able to see it, because my soul or mind, and the tree are not separate entities. We are just one of countless expressions of the meanings and patterns that are instantiated in the mind of the universe. I don't need to transmute the tree like some alchemical process that happens in materialism, where we transmute physical objects into thoughts. In my worldview, there are only thoughts. I experience a tree as a thought, because the tree is a thought. It is an instantiation of meaningful patterns like shapes, sizes, colors, and textures, and these meanings are what the tree actually is. These are experienced as thoughts. This worldview can also give logical explanation for memory, because memory is transmitted meaning with every thought, with every event, present in every moment of our lives and transmitted through patterns and ideas we experience throughout life. Now compare this to materialism, that states there is a little space of meat in my brain where memories stand as some kind of furniture or something. It is laughable if you think about it. Experience makes sense only if we see it through meanings and patterns. It makes no sense to see the object and think of it as something independent from our sight. There is clearly a connection between what we think of as an object when we see it and the object itself. Something is happening between the reality of the object and our experience of it. You will never encounter anything in your life that isn't connected to how you are experiencing it. This means that the experiencing part must be included in our understanding of reality. We can't separate reality of the object from how we see it. Our seeing is directly participating in the existence of that object. It is not that there is our sight and then there is an object. No, both our sight and object are merged together. They are not separated things. Perception of the object is included in the object itself. It is not that there is our eyes, our sight, and then there is an object on the other side. The truth is that object and our sight are actually the same thing. Every object leaves an impression on the soul. It is not just a thing that is seen. It is an experience that is felt. This experience is the eternal pattern in the mind of God that is being reflected in the temporary material reality for us to experience it as a fleeting moment. This is why the experience of material world seems temporary, because it is not the original. It is a copy, like a reflection in a mirror, and this is what makes it fleeting and almost non-existent. This is why same principles are reflected in various instances of temporality. Various things have the same shapes, various things appear in the same numbers, but these things are not themselves the information, or numbers and shapes. Things are just a lower expression within consciousness, while numbers and shapes are eternal patterns in the mind of God that are being reflected in various instances through temporary world. The shape is not a manifested thing. It is what allows the manifestation of what we call a shape in the material realm. Number is not a number of any number of objects. Number is not a sound or a symbol that we use to represent it. Number is pure meaning, pure pattern that has no existence as we think of it in a material sense. From our perspective, it exists as nothingness, but this nothingness is full of meanings that are real, and they are what allow experience to happen. Mind, or the soul, is where reality happens, but we, through years of education and superficial worldview, have forgotten that this realm of ideas is what shapes the world. Plato was the first known figure in Western philosophy to propose that the soul is both the source of life and the seat of the mind. In his dialogues, the soul assumes a variety of roles, demonstrating its complexity in Plato's thought. It is, first and foremost, what animates the body by imparting life, articulated most notably in the Laws and Phaedrus, where the soul is described as a self-mover. To be alive, according to Plato, is to be capable of self-motion, and the soul provides this capacity. Furthermore, the soul is the bearer of moral properties, meaning that when a person is virtuous, it is the soul that possesses virtue, not the body. It is also the mind, the faculty through which we think and reason. Plato's depiction of the soul oscillates between these roles across his dialogues. For instance, in the Republic, Socrates asks whether functions such as ruling, deliberating, and caring for others could be assigned to anything other than the soul. The answer is a resounding no. These functions, including life itself, are unique to the soul. Similarly, the Phaedo presents challenges to understanding Plato's theory of the soul due to its shifting emphasis between different aspects of the soul's nature. In the cyclical and form of life arguments, the soul is portrayed as fundamentally linked to life, especially in its final argument, where this connection is developed concretely through the soul's association with the concept of life itself. This theme is further elaborated in the Phaedrus and Laws, where Plato defines the soul as self-motion. Unlike inanimate objects, which require external forces to move, living beings drive themselves, a capacity attributed to the soul. Through this lens, Plato's doctrine emerges. life is self-motion, and the soul brings life to the body by moving it. However, in the Phaedo's recollection and affinity arguments, the emphasis shifts. Here, the soul is not discussed in relation to life, but as a knower or mind. The affinity argument, in particular, highlights the soul's immortality through its likeness to the eternal and unchanging forms, which are apprehended in acts of cognition. This dual characterization of the soul, as the principle of life and as the thinker, has long puzzled scholars. Sarah Brodie, for instance, noted that readers of the Phaedo often accused Plato of conflating the soul as the mind, or the faculty of thought, with the soul as the animating principle of the body. Other scholars, such as I.M. Crombie and Dorothea Fried, have echoed similar concerns. More recent interpretations, however, have challenged this critique. Scholars now argue that Plato's theory of the soul is groundbreaking precisely because it unites these disparate functions. And with this notion, I completely agree. By combining the soul's roles as a mover, imparting life through self-motion, and as a thinker, moving through the activity of thought, Plato introduced the conception of the soul that influenced later ancient and medieval philosophy. For Plato, the soul's ability to animate and to think are inseparable, as the soul moves things by means of its thoughts. It's all happening within our thoughts. Everything we experience is within our minds. When you see the tree on the side of the road, it is your mind that creates the image and gives you the power to see. When you're touching the tree, the same thing is happening. Your mind produces the sensation of touch and gives you the power to touch. You perceive your body as solid because your mind, as part of nature, functions in such a way that it produces the effect of hardness when encountering what we call material objects. This experience of matter, however, is a mental projection. Matter exists only because we think it does when we perceive it, and our minds produce this effect automatically. You can't control this because God shaped your mind to produce this specific experience when confronted with what we perceive as physical objects. But matter isn't truly material. Modern science reinforces this view. Physics has shown that matter, as traditionally conceived, is not fundamental. Subatomic particles are governed by quantum principles, behaving as waves and particles without well-defined positions or sizes. In the standard model of particle physics, matter is not a fundamental entity but a manifestation of quantum interactions. Particles like quarks and leptons, and the composites they form, give the appearance of matter taking up space due to the exclusion principle and other forces. What we used to call particles are not truly particles. There is no matter. It does not exist. Particles are not particles. They are fields. They extend indefinitely. Everything is merged in one big quantum field. Everything that we see are just appearances that are emerging from our point of view. Yes, when we observe through microscope we can see particles, but this is just how this underlying reality appears on the screen of perception. Physicists are inventing all kinds of obscurities to explain the material world, but I believe they will never come even close to explanation until they realize that matter does not exist. This illusion of materiality arises from our perceptions, and when no one is perceiving, there is only the mental realm of ideas. We are fooled by the way we experience matter, but the thing we call matter is actually an experience itself, or in other words, an idea. The experience of ideas is the thing we call reality, and when you truly realize the meaning of this, you come to the understanding that it makes much more sense. It is not that we are fooled, but we are mistaken, because we are inventing the concept of matter, so we could explain the experience of hard objects. But there is no need for inventing concepts, because we don't need to explain experience by looking any further than what it is. And it is an experience, not matter. Matter is an experience. If we are experiencing it, why do we need to invent a new word for this? Could it be that this thing is an experience itself? And further, when we see how we are experiencing it, we come to the understanding that it is through our mind. Therefore, it is an idea. Hard objects are something that arises from our experience. It is not the thing that gives us the experience. It is that experience itself is creating this effect in us. What we are experiencing is an idea. It's not magic but nature itself, revealing that what we perceive as material is merely the appearance of ideas. Once again, when no one is perceiving, there is no material world, only the eternal reality of ideas and the mind of God. It's all within the mind, and our minds are part of nature, or rather part of the universe, which is itself one vast, interconnected mind. So, reality is one vast mind that imagines everything we see. I believe this great mind is God. He is alive, just like we are, and he possesses the same qualities we do, but on a scale so immense that we can scarcely comprehend his existence. However, this should not be understood that God's experience is of the same nature as that of a human being. For example, in a way that he has the same body, thoughts, and so on. No, this is not possible. God has the same qualities as we, because our qualities are something that he gives us. Our qualities such as thoughts, appearance, abilities, intellect, these are all God's, and he gave that to us. Our consciousness is God's consciousness, but to God, the events that are happening are not perceived like we perceive them. God is not going through events, he gives the events to us, but God is outside space and time, he sustains space and time. He is at the same time inside space and time, and outside space and time. Space and time is dependent of him, but he is not dependent of space and time. All events that are happening in space and time, and all events that will ever happen in time, to God all of this already happened. God is outside time, and to him all time of this world looks like a single moment. This is why it is impossible to speak about God, or attribute any qualities to him. Because God is not something that is dependent on anything, to him rules do not apply. Events happening to God already happened, because God is the one who produced everything, past, present, and future. All contradictions, irregularities, impossibilities, do not apply to God, they are defined by God. God's thoughts are not fleeting and blurry, they are clearer than the reality in front of our eyes, they are the light that allows us to see, the darkness that emanates light, the background of everything that is. God's thoughts are transcendent reality, something we cannot see directly, the realm of eternal ideas, or forms, and out of these eternal forms he made everything. God's thinking is not like our thinking. God's thinking is what shapes the universe, the patterns in the heavens, the colors of stars, the nature of justice, the texture of life, the sound of music, the harmony of nature, the shape of clouds, the smell of flowers, the sound of waves, the beauty of this world. All that you see is a lower manifestation of God's perfect knowledge and goodness. We exist inside this reality, which is just a small fragment of God's imagination. The entire reality is God's dream, and we are within it. God is not just one person in a dream. He is not even the dream itself. He is the one who is dreaming it. This is the connection, but at the same time the difference between us and God. I like to illustrate it in a schema similar to Neoplatonic notion of three hypostases. There is the ground of reality, or consciousness where everything is happening, then there is the dream, or a product of consciousness, then there is God, who encompasses all consciousness at once. We are at the lower level, we are within the dream, inside reality, while reality is above us, holding us and all things within itself, then there is something that is even above reality, because reality is within God, who is eternal. Reality might not be eternal, maybe God decides to stop dreaming, and starts a new dream, a new reality, so everything is perishable, even the reality. Only God is eternal, holding the Platonic forms within his mind and using these eternal principles to imagine, or create, from his mind this lower temporal world. God is the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If we use the dream analogy, the Father is the one who created the dream, the Son, or Jesus, is the main avatar, just like when you are dreaming and you are one of the characters, but at the same time the source of the dream. Holy Spirit would be the life of all other characters, or life energy within the dream that gives abilities to all other characters and connects them to the Father and the Son. Each soul is the avatar within God's dream. It is at the same time a part of God and separate from him as it is part of his dream, while God himself is the one that holds the dream within his eternal mind. John 15 verses 4-5 says, "Remain in me, and I will remain in you, just as no branch can bear fruit by itself unless it remains in the vine, neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. The one who remains in me, and I in him, will bear much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. This means that you are not your thoughts, your body, your emotions, your sensations, your memories, or your imagination. All of these are experiences given to you by God, but you are not the experience itself. You are the experiencer, the one who receives the experience. Everything you encounter, feel, and think is produced by God and observed by you. I came to this realization when I began to notice that I don't identify with my thoughts. My thoughts come and go, and I simply observe them. I don't identify with my body either. I observe my body and its sensations. I see myself feeling emotions, remembering things, imagining scenarios, but none of these define who I truly am. They are events happening to me, and I experience them, but I also observe myself from within. There's a deeper awareness watching it all unfold. What became clear to me is that I have very little control over these events. The situations I find myself in, the circumstances I face, are not my own doing. I influence some things, but most, around 99%, are simply given to me. They just happen, and I'm here to experience them. Even my feelings, my reactions to these uncontrollable events, arise naturally. I don't choose how I feel, nor do I choose how things unfold. It all feels like it is prepared for me by something greater than myself. This is why I believe that everything is given to us by God. However, there is one essential point of choice: how we choose to act on the experiences that God has provided. Whatever happens in life, however overwhelming or uncontrollable the circumstances may seem, it is ultimately up to us to decide how to act within them. Events, feelings, memories, and experiences all flow from God's will, and yet our souls, which are given by God, possess the unique ability to act freely. If God is perfectly free to do whatever He wills, then our souls, as part of His essence, share in this divine freedom. God decides everything, but we are participants in His will, actively expressing His freedom through our choices. This is the source of free will. God, who has no external comparison and is influenced by nothing outside Himself, acts freely, and because we are connected to Him, we too act freely. No matter the situation, whether we feel in control or not, we are part of God's will, which is infinitely free. As expressions of this divine freedom, we are not bound by external forces. Rather, we directly participate in God's freedom. Your soul is the point of choice where this freedom manifests. When you act, it is an expression of God's infinite will, working through you. Take hunger, for example. When you feel hungry, it may seem as though hunger controls you. But hunger itself is an expression of God's will and therefore your own freedom. Hunger is not something external influencing you. It is part of the freedom God has given you to experience and act. When you choose to eat, you are exercising your freedom as a participant in God's will. Free will is the ability to do anything at all. When you ask someone to prove that they are free, they will do the first thing that comes to their mind, and they will say, "Look, I am free to do this." This is exactly what free will is. Modern discussions about free will revolve around the absurdities: my mind is controlling me, therefore I am not free. Your mind is your free will. It is not that mind is controlling you, because you are the mind. The thing that you think is controlling you is exactly your will. So if the thing that is controlling you is your will, it can't be the case that you are under control. You are just one expression of God's will, who is free and unbound by anything because everything is a lower manifestation within His intellect. If you are a part of something that has no point of beginning or end, if you are an expression of God's will, you must be free, because God is not controlled by anything. Control is a lower manifestation of God's will. God invented control. God invented even freedom. He is even above this, above freedom. We are free as expression of God's will, as part of reality or God's dream, But God is above this. He is above freedom. Freedom is a lower reality that God makes possible. We are at the same time controlled and free, because both of these are invented by God and expressed through reality. Everything is lower than God. Whatever you say, whatever concept you imagine, God is not subjected to it. He is the one who allows it or doesn't. It is his decision. It is even wrong to say decision, because decision-making is also something that God invented. He is not subjected to it. He does not make decisions. He makes them possible. This is why God is unbound, because all boundaries are lower expressions from his perspective. There is only one single thing that would prove to me that I don't have free will, and that would be the situation when I am hungry, and there is a plate of food in front of me, and I wish to take some, while being completely free to do it. If in this situation I somehow couldn't take food, regardless of the plate in front of me, and regardless of my wishes, if I had to stay hungry against my wishes in front of this plate of food, this would mean that I am not free. This is the only single way to prove there is no free will. Free will is not connected how we came to conclusion to do something, because this conclusion is your will. If you are free to make a conclusion, it means that you are free, regardless of the reasons for making a conclusion. If we must go to the cause of our decisions, it is our soul, or mind, which is rooted in God, so God is the cause of all decisions, which is what makes us free. God is not controlling us. He allows our freedom. It is even incorrect to say that God is free. God allows freedom, but he himself is above it. In this sense, even hunger is not a force of control but a free experience, because it flows from God, who is unbound by anything. This principle applies to all aspects of life, even the most challenging situations. When a natural disaster occurs, such as a storm that destroys your home, it may feel as though the disaster is an external force acting upon you. But you are not separate from the natural disaster. You are part of it. Just as the storm is an expression of nature, so too are you. You are not being controlled by the disaster. You are participating in it. How you choose to respond to the destruction, how you act in the midst of the storm, is an expression of your free will, which is rooted in God's infinite freedom. You are not a being who is acted upon by nature. You are nature. You are not a being controlled by circumstances. You are a participant in those circumstances. This means that no external force truly controls you because you are a part of the event itself. Your actions, your choices, and your responses are all free because they emerge from your soul, which is connected to God's freedom. You are not bound by the events or emotions that arise. You are part of them. Whether it is hunger, joy, sorrow, or even disaster, each moment is an opportunity to act freely as an expression of God's will. This is the essence of existence: to witness, to experience, and to respond with the choices we are given. Yes, we are individuals, but at the same time we are not. It is hard to explain this, because it seems paradoxical. But the truth is that you are merged with reality. Without reality you wouldn't be alive, but at the same time you are a soul, a center of awareness, that seems detached from reality, because of our inner world. But we must understand that even our inner world is not something unique. It is a feature of every living being. It is the nature of reality itself. We are here for a short time within the eternal mind of God. All our actions, feelings, memories, and experiences flow from him. We are here to receive what he has prepared for us, and with the soul as our center of awareness, we observe and make choices in response to what is placed before us. When I speak of the soul, you might confuse it with the mind, but in my understanding, the soul is both the mind and the body. The soul is not something separate. It is everything that we are. The soul is the center of attention, the place of knowing, the source of awareness. It gives us the ability to experience a body, to have a mind, and to truly live. I don't separate the soul from the mind or the body because they are not separate. The soul is the mind, and the soul is the body. The mind and body are expressions or mechanisms of the soul. When the body experiences something, the soul experiences it too, because they are one and the same. The body is not a shell, it is an extension of the soul. Likewise, the mind, our thoughts, our ideas, our awareness, is the activity of the soul. The soul is the one that thinks, and the mind is simply its expression. The body and mind are not separate from the soul. They are ways in which the soul manifests itself. And the soul itself is not ours. It is given to us and sustained by God. Everything we are, everything we experience, comes from God. We are here, in this moment, to receive what He gives, to witness His work, and to live within the mystery of His eternal mind. I often say that reality is God's mind, but I realized that it is much more correct to say that it is God's will. God's mind is the source of reality, but reality itself is an expression of His mind, which means that reality is something that God wills into existence with the power of His mind. We all have our own separate thoughts and seemingly separate minds that God gave us, but at the same time we are connected through God's will. God has His own mind that sustains it all, and the entire reality is expression of His will. We are connected to God, and He can read our thoughts, because He is the reason we have our thoughts, but we can't read God's thoughts, because our thoughts, like everything else, are an expression of His will. God is the universal mind that governs the cosmos, and He is inaccessible to us. No one can truly reach God in our earthly existence, but we aren't inaccessible to Him. He is here all the time, because we are expressions of His will. When people say they came in direct contact with God, they are in one way correct, but in another they are wrong, because it is impossible to reach God's state of being. What they reach is consciousness. Every soul is an expression of this consciousness. Everything that exists is its expression, the entire material universe, but the difference between us and God lies in the fact that we are within consciousness, we are lower manifestation, while God is its source. We are within it, we are its expression, while it is within God, it is itself God's expression. I am not saying that God is some separate being outside consciousness. I am saying that the entire consciousness is God's expression. He produces consciousness, while everything else is a lower manifestation inside consciousness. God can see everything at once, while we can see only from one perspective, one single point of view, while God sees from all points of view at once, and transcends even this. He doesn't even need to look at anything. Everything that ever happens is already registered in the mind of God. To us, God's mind looks like emptiness, that darkness where consciousness resides. Some would say that this is nothingness, but it is not. It is just the transcendent reality that we are unable to reach. And to us, it looks like darkness, but from God's perspective, it is the place of light, it is the realm of angels, and the source of all being. Just like when you are dreaming, you are the dream, but at the same time you are above it, because it is your product. The same is with God and reality. Everything is one big consciousness that emanates from God and the entire reality, and all beings within it are lower expressions of this consciousness. Therefore, God is not separate from reality, but at the same time He is above it because He is its source. We can't say God is conscious or unconscious, because conscious and unconscious are distinctions that happen within reality, within consciousness, but God is the one who holds consciousness within Himself. God is not just conscious, He is above it. We can't even describe it by saying God is conscious, because even the greatest amount of consciousness is lower expression that comes from God. It may sound absurd, but consider it deeply. Everything you experience, everything you see, touch, smell, and understand is ultimately nothing more than thoughts. It's all mental. Everything you know and perceive is produced by your mind, shaped by your imagination. Your true being, the one looking out from within your body, is not your brain. The brain is merely an image, a piece of matter you think is there because your soul creates that image. God designed you this way, nature shaped you to think, and everything you experience is a thought. What truly thinks, that is who you are. You are not the outward appearance that your perception presents. Your appearance is just an effect, a product of your mind's perception, and perception itself is created by thoughts. So, you cannot be your perception. You must be that which thinks, the source of perception, that which produces it, the force behind the images and experiences. This thinking Imagining essence is your true self. There is a particular quality to your existence, something that has no shape, no size, yet it defines what it feels like to be you. This understanding becomes crystal clear when you reflect on your existence. It is not something that science can prove, because it is undetectable by any physical means. You may wonder why. It is because science operates in the realm of descriptions. It is examining how reality works, but not what it is. If reality is painting on canvas, physics is the one that examines the nature of the image, colors, and the properties of portrait or whatever the image contains, while metaphysics examines the canvas, the brush, the skill of the one who draws. Metaphysics is not something that can contradict science. All scientific theories, if they are correct, must align with metaphysics. Metaphysics is the thing that makes physics possible. All physics is based on observations, and what these observations do, it is the picture on canvas. But metaphysics is not concerned with this question. It is focused on the question why we are able to do physics. What is this thing that makes the picture possible? What is this thing that makes physics possible? The only way to confirm this truth is by living and reflecting on your own state of being. Consider the experience of pain. Science can measure which part of your brain is active when you feel pain, but only you can feel the pain. This feeling is true reality, and what science detects is just an appearance. It is an illusion created through perception. But the feeling is truth, not the perception. The feeling of pain is real, but perception is just how the reality looks like. This is not just for pain. This goes for everything we see. The feeling is a quality, and the entire reality is made of these qualities that are undetectable through perception. They must be experienced. Perception is a byproduct of experience, but experience is real, and perception is just how that experience manifests. What we see is only how these qualities are presenting themselves when we perceive them. When you see the red color, you can never describe the feeling of red to a blind colored person. A blind colored person can acknowledge that the object is red, but a blind colored person will never truly know if this is true, because this feeling of redness, that quality that goes directly to our soul, is what causes experience, and this is what true reality is. This is absolutely clear in this case. Without the ability to experience the color, this specific person completely loses the perception of this part of reality. If there were a case where you can't experience something else, that something would disappear from your view of reality, this means that experience of reality is reality. Our experience of qualities is always mediated by perception, but what is perception? It is just another aspect of experience. This may sound complicated, but it is as simple as it can be. There is only one big consciousness, and everything in it is a bunch of experiences, and this is what makes reality real. Now let's get back to a blind colored person to illustrate this distinction between perception and true reality of feelings and qualities. Even if a blind colored person knows that the object is red, he would learn something new if he suddenly got the ability to see the color, because this would allow him to feel the quality of redness. This feeling is real, not the red that we see on the surface, but the feeling we get from absorbing it. This blind colored person is the proof that reality is not just something that we see outside, because our sight directly participates in our view of reality, which means that reality is not some separate thing that we see with our sight, but reality is the sight, experience is reality. This is much more simple than materialistic conception, where sight needs an explanation of its own, in our heads, than the color needs the explanation of its own, out there. In idealism, everything is one thing. Everything is experience that is happening in consciousness, and this consciousness is everything that exists. In fact, everything is its product. This is why science can never reach the true source of pain, the feeling, the true reality, not the activation of your brain, but true feeling, the intensity, the discomfort. This is the only true thing about pain, and science can't reach this reality. Because science only detects what we can perceive, it is bound to the realm of perception, while the realm of truth, the realm of qualities and feelings, is undetectable. This is because pain, like all sensations, is felt through your soul, through that qualitative aspect of your being that I am describing. Science is exploring the portrait, it is exploring the image on the canvas, while the soul, the experience or metaphysical reality, the thing that makes the image possible, the canvas, the person that does the painting, this is the realm beyond physics, beyond science. It is not something to observe or theorize about. It is something to live. It transcends knowledge. Because it is the source of knowledge, it is called life or the soul. This soul is the life God shares with you. It is a small piece of God's will, and God shares it with you because God loves you. This is happening with every living being. God, in His infinite love, shares everything with us and allows us to experience reality by ourselves. No one else can access this part of your experience but you. When you feel pain, it is not your brain that truly feels it. Your brain, as science detects, is just showing signals and functions, but it is not the thing that experiences pain. This is why science can never detect the actual feeling of pain, only the outward signs of it in the brain. Those are superficial images, electrical signals, nothing more. The real experience of pain is something internal, something only you can know and feel, something undetectable to anyone or anything outside your true being, which is a gift from God. This notion that we are connected to God as expressions of His will leads some people to claim that they themselves are God, or that all of us are God. This can't be further from the truth. We are just a lower manifestation of God's will. Yes, we came from God, but God Himself is above us. We are something that He created. We are connected to God as His creation, but not in a way that God separated a part of Himself and created us, but through the fact that God emanates consciousness, and through consciousness He projects reality, like an image on the screen, and we are a part of that image, while God is the projector. So everything that happens in something that God holds within Himself, while we are inside this thing that God holds. Let's imagine a scene where you are dreaming two people. Let's call them Anna and Dante. Are they your true self? In a sense they are you, but they are lower expressions of your dream, and you are your dream, but even this, the entire dream, is a lower expression of you. So yes, we are God's expression, God's will, but not God Himself. We can't attribute any descriptions to God. He is always above that thing that we say, no matter how impossible it seems. God is the source of all impossibilities, and impossibilities influence only something that exists, but God does not exist. God allows the existence. All things are something, small parts of reality, but God is the thing on which the existence of everything is based on. God can never be something, because something is always insufficient. We can't say that God is this or that, because God allows the existence of this and that. We can't even speak about God. He is beyond all attributes, because all attributes are something that God invented. We can't even say that God does something, because doing is something that happens within reality, but God transcends reality, and doing is something that God created, not something He is subjected to. He is not even trying, He just allows things. It is in nature of God that no effort at all is all the effort of this world, and even while doing nothing, God is doing everything. To do anything is beneath God. If God ever did anything, He would not be God. God does everything by doing nothing. In fact, even doing everything while not doing anything is for God a lower category. Even doing nothing is too much to characterize how much effort God provides to do everything. Everything looks like nothing to God, and God's nothing is greater than everything. Only God is real, and everything else, when compared to God, is only an illusion. Even our private thoughts are not our own thoughts, because there is only God. Nothing else has concrete existence. Everything is literally like a shadow appearing on the wall because God emanates light. When I speak of my thoughts, I am speaking from my personal perspective, but I am drawing from the same mental reality we all share. This shared mind allows us to understand one another, to recognize familiar images, to construct meaning in the same way. It is why we all experience the same smells, the same textures, the same sensations. How could this be possible if each of us were confined to a completely separate reality within our own heads? Carl Jung described the collective unconscious as a vast reservoir of archetypes, images, and patterns that all of humanity shares. It is within this collective mind that we find the symbols and structures that give meaning to our world. When we think, we are not merely constructing thoughts in isolation, We are drawing from this deep well of shared experience, assembling stories, interpretations, and understandings that have existed within us since the beginning of our species. The idea of fear, the idea of sadness, all emotions and feelings are actually ideas experienced by the mind. When the idea of fear invades our psyche, our entire reality takes its shape, because ideas and patterns, and how they influence reality, are persistent and eternal. The single event or experience of fear in the material world is a single insignificant in the eternal and persistent sea of fear that inflicts every soul when meanings and patterns that lead the soul to fear are encountered in reality. Every such encounter is connected to these same expressions of reality, the meanings and patterns that become the expression of fear in the soul. Fear becomes like a compartment of its own, an archetypal structure in collective consciousness that we enter when various patterns of fear invade our souls. This is just one example that affects our psyche, but the realm of ideas is endless, with all possible shapes, sizes, movements. All of these are ideas in the great soul of the universe. The shapes and sizes of physical phenomena are just temporary expressions of these endless possibilities of meanings and patterns that are eternal and indestructible. They are indestructible because destruction itself is just one single manifestation of such expressions. This is also why all of these expressions are impossible to fully capture in limited human understanding. It is because all our understanding is just a lower expression of these meaningful patterns, and they are the very embodiment of perfect and absolute understanding, which at the same time is something that cannot be fully understood. The top of understanding is something that cannot be captured, because every possible understanding, no matter how comprehensive, and no matter how much information it comprehends, even if it comprehends infinity itself, is just a lower expression of this perfection. This also applies to each single category of understanding. To understand all shapes or numbers is impossible, because even the understanding of infinity in the domain of shapes or numbers is just a lower expression of that which allows the understanding of shapes and numbers. So understanding all shapes or numbers is impossible, because even all shapes and numbers that could possibly be understood are transcended by their source, from where they come into existence. So even understanding one single category of all possible understanding is impossible, let alone the understanding of everything at the same time. Only God understands everything by transcending understanding itself. God does not need to think to solve a problem, or to do something. His thoughts are Platonic ideas, eternal perfection that transcends everything. God's thinking is greater than reality. His thoughts are eternal templates in his divine mind. They make the rules through which reality is made. It is impossible to imagine this, but God does not need thinking. He transcends it. He only knows things. God has no doubts. Only perfection and purity exists within him. There is no ignorance, there is no right or wrong, there is no understanding or not understanding. God is the source of these ideas. All ideas are lower than God. He is the source of goodness, justice, knowledge, intelligence, beauty. All of these are within God, or lower than God himself. God is above everything. Even perfection is lower than God. This is why understanding things is impossible, because God is the source of it, and nothing can come close to his perfection. This is not just for understanding. This is how every idea operates. All feelings of fear are transcended by the source from which fear comes. All possible expressions of courage or justice are transcended by each of their sources, and each of these sources is held within an even greater source that contains them and infinite others. And those others are contained in infinite containers of infinite infinities. When all of it is taken together, the source of everything is actually nothing. Only nothing can contain everything, and everything can only exist in nothing. When physicists say that the universe came from nothing, they are right. But in materialism, this is a contradiction. How can something come from nothing? It is only in the mind that things can appear out of nowhere. Mind is empty and full at the same time. It is unconstrained by physical rules because it is their source. This nothing is not nothing. It is everything that ever existed and will ever exist. But it is of such a nature that it must be both everything and nothing, because it is the place where divisions do not exist. It cannot be opposed to something because it contains everything. And if the opposite of everything is nothing, then as much as it is everything, it also must be nothing. If it were the case that it was everything and not nothing, or nothing and not everything, this would contradict the very nature of the source of everything, where even nothing is just one of its expressions. Everything and nothing are concepts defined by God. Philosophers do not understand that illogicality is not the opposite of logic. The illogical and the logical are the same thing, just like all other opposites. All opposites, like nothing and something, are not opposites, but one and the same thing, and what unites them is God. God is the source of all opposites. God is not subject to reality or non-reality. He is the one who decides what is real and what is unreal. God is not limited by concepts such as possible and impossible. God is the one who decides what is possible and what is impossible. As the source of everything, God is not everything, something, or nothing. God is the one who defines these things. A common misconception about idealism is the belief that it claims reality exists only in individual minds. We have been taught to equate our minds with our brains, but what if this assumption is incorrect? Even we, ourself, our mind, is actually nothing. It is an image that appears in this blankness. Our private thoughts that only we think of are drawn from eternity of nothingness. What we are describing when we say that we have separate, private minds is just a story that we tell ourselves, a collection of images that appear on the blank screen of nothingness. But these images are short-lived. They are happening within projection, because there is a projector that sheds light towards the blank screen, and this light from God allows the appearance of the story. Everything that is real is actually God, and everything else is non-existent when seen through the eyes of eternal nothingness, the true nature of reality. A being beyond everything and nothing, the one who is, or God, is able to make everything appear from nothing, thus making the impossible possible. Everything we think, imagine, or perceive is drawn from this single source. Even our intellect, personal imagination, and private thoughts, though seemingly our own, originate from the same container that produces the entire reality we experience. We do not create reality within our heads. We perceive the reality of the mind in which we live. When you dream, your mind creates the entire reality in which you find yourself in, and you can't tell if this is your dream until you wake up. Just as we create the entire worlds in our dreams, I am saying that reality itself is made in the same way. I am not saying that your individual mind is creating a dream. As Carl Jung theorized, even our dreams come from the collective mind or the collective unconscious. But the dream is a great analogy of what I want to explain. In the same way we seem to create the entire worlds in our dreams, in this similar way God creates reality. The only difference is that our dreams are drawn from this collective mind, but God's dream is a creation out of nothing. God is the starting point. Only God can create, and do things with no reliance on anything, while everyone else and everything else must rely on God for its existence and everything it does, as Acts 17 verses 24 to 25 shares. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He himself gives to all people life and breath and everything else. However, God is too perfect, eternal, and can't be measured as the world of change and decay. God's ideas are the mental structure that projects reality down from his throne of the divine kingdom in the heaven. Colossians 1 verse 16 confirms, "For in him all things were created. All things have been created through him and for him." And Hebrews 11 verse 6 declares, "And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who approaches him must believe that he exists." This is why we look at the world from a lower level of consciousness, which manifests as our imperfect world of appearances. This higher realm of intellect, or God's perfect thoughts, are the Platonic ideas, the templates through which everything in reality manifests. This is where I particularly appreciate Schopenhauer, his embrace of Platonic ideas or forms. We are merely observers of an objective field of ideas, what Schopenhauer called the objectification of the will. Berkeley, on the other hand, grounds his idealism in empiricism, relying heavily on the senses. He claims that all ideas come from perception, that God directly creates perceptions in our minds, and that these perceptions are the very ideas upon which his idealism is based. However, both Schopenhauer and Plato argue that perception is deceptive. The world we perceive is not reality itself, but a mere copy of true ideas that exist in a higher mental realm. For Berkeley, perception itself is reality, but for Plato and Schopenhauer, perception is merely an imperfect vision of pure forms. This distinction is evident in Berkeley's criticism of abstract ideas. He argues that we can never conceive of an idea without its particular properties as experienced through perception. But for Plato and Schopenhauer, the opposite is true. Our perceptions are the imperfect copies of a higher, intellectual realm of pure ideas. I don't like Berkeley's view on this particular issue, because although it accepts there is the supreme mind, it at the same time denies his transcendence. In my view, idealism is the only metaphysical position that truly affirms God and soul because it is grounded in the idea that everything is a consequence of the supreme mind. However, Berkeley's form of idealism, even though it affirms primacy of mind, it rejects abstract thought, and thus, in my view, diminishes the power of thought, and returns us back into matter. And even though it denies matter, it is at the same time constrained by all its deficiencies. Thus I stand with Plato and Schopenhauer in a belief that idea precedes perception. It is its source, not the other way around. Pure ideas govern the material, ideas transcend the material, for they are rooted in God, the source of everything. I came to this same conclusion when I realized that perception is changing, while the thoughts or experiences that I encounter with my soul are always the same. The meaning of those experiences, how they affect me, the way they interact with my soul has a certain continuity that remains. My body, and everything that is visible and detectable about me is also changing, but there exists something behind this looks, something persistent that remains always what it always was, which means that perception, or reality of appearances, depends on how we think, while this deeper reality of pure thinking is the foundation. When God created this world, He did not create an ultimate reality, but a lower level of being, a realm where things come into existence and fade away. But God's true nature is eternal, and as long as we remain within this transient world, we cannot grasp eternity. Our reality is but a lower shadow of the eternal, something that God reveals to us through His light. However, this transcendent realm of Platonic ideas should not be understood through simplistic logic of materialism. I already know many will do this. This realm is not a literal space where things are stored. This is a kind of mind that contains all possible knowledge within his thoughts, and everything that is real is a lower expression of this mind's perfect knowledge. Thoughts, or ideas, do not need space to exist, or some kind of realm. They have no quantitative existence. They are like pure information in nothingness. Try to come in contact with your mind and ideas within it. You know it is there, but it is nowhere in particular. It does not need space. It is a realm beyond space. Just like you have your ideas and your knowledge, God has His ideas and His knowledge. But the difference between you and God is that God does not need to put any effort in thinking. His thinking is the source. He transcends everything. He just knows everything, and everything that exists just follows His will. Without Him needing to manage it, everything is already perfectly settled. God's mind is beyond human perception, and the only way we experience His eternal thoughts is through the veil of our limited senses. If we could see as God sees, we would recognize this world as a mere dream, an illusion that dissolves at death. When we die, we enter eternity, which is the true nature of reality. What this actually looks like, I do not know. Perhaps it is pure darkness, but even if it is darkness, then that darkness must be the very essence of reality. And if it is darkness, it must still contain something within it. It is not mere nothingness, but peace, tranquility. It is a darkness that emanates light, a darkness that is alive, because it is the darkness from which all things were created. I cannot say with certainty what eternity holds, but in this framework it is the ultimate truth, the reality beyond all illusions. One challenge that arises with idealism is the question of individuality. If we all share a single mind in which we live and think, how can we also be distinct individuals with our own isolated experiences? This is a question I cannot answer directly, and it may be the greatest difficulty with idealism as a model of reality. However, I see it as a minor issue compared to the overwhelming problems inherent in other philosophical systems, such as materialism. For example, one of the ways most idealist thinkers think about this problem is by drawing analogy with dreams. In a dream, our mind can generate multiple characters who act independently, appearing alive with their own distinct behaviors. Some studies even suggest that a dreamer can recall the memories of different dream characters, as if they had their own personal histories. Bernardo Kastrup, one of our contemporary philosophers of idealism, has proposed the idea of dissociation, suggesting that the mind fragments itself into multiple, seemingly independent minds. I investigated some studies. They even show that these dissociated identities can be created purposefully by forcing traumatic events upon individuals. These experiments were done in the likes of MK Ultra program with psychedelics. There are even cases where a person has some kind of disability. A person could be colorblind, and when the dissociation happens, this other dissociated identity has no issues seeing colors. You must understand that this happens despite the fact that we are speaking about the same person, the same body, the same mind, those same eyes that could not see colors. When dissociation happens they can see them. Somehow mind can separate itself into two completely separate individuals. If this process can occur within an individual, it may also be true on a larger scale, in reality itself. This dissociation of the supreme mind may not literally be a process we experience in our human experience of dissociation, but it is at least a great analogy that clearly points that it is possible that one mind can think as if it were multiple separate minds within it. The mind can clearly do this by simply thinking in a way that appears as two completely separated individuals, each with its own knowledge, thoughts, experiences. So, there is a way where mind, by pure ability to think, can divide itself in two or more separate points of experience. I like this theory a lot, and in a way we could even say that I adopted it, but I changed the meaning of it a little bit. At least we can say it gave me inspiration to construct my own view of solving this issue. Dr. Bernardo Kastrup is the modern philosopher who influenced my view the most, as he is one of rare prominent philosophers who promotes pure metaphysics of idealism, which is the metaphysics that I personally prefer above all others for a long time. However, Dr. Kastrup and I differ in outlook on some specific aspects of idealism, but metaphysics in essence remains grounded in life. So it is not even the disagreement, it is more like describing the same thing with different language, or pointing at it from a different perspective. So I decided to point this out, because I think this comparison is a great way to go into more detailed view of my thoughts on metaphysics, and to allow my viewers better understanding of it. For example, there is a difference in a way we see the nature of the supreme mind and its connection with each soul. Dr. Kastrup would say that the supreme mind is irrational, just like Schopenhauer. He points out that this supreme mind is pure will, without rationality, while in my philosophy, the supreme mind is the peak of rationality. It even transcends rationality, because it does not need to deliberate about how to solve a problem. It already knows all things absolutely. It can't make a mistake. Everything it does is perfectly rational. And the peak of reasoning is understanding that everything in reality is necessarily for the greatest good. God represents perfect harmony, and everything that comes from him adds to this harmonious order. Every entity, every object, every law, each specific property of each specific thing has a purpose, and it perfectly blends into everything that already is. When we see evil as something that God did wrong, this is not God being irrational. This is our inability to be rational enough to see that even all suffering and evil is part of the perfection, part of good, or for the greater good. With this difference in mind, I also think that there is a slight difference in which I see each individual connected to God. Dr. Kastrup is fully committed to a view that our rationality is something special, something that we develop through evolution, while I believe it is imparted into us from the beginning by the power of God. In this sense, I believe that each individual is not a dissociation of the supreme mind, but a reflection of the whole. It is not a part or illusory dissociated alter. It is part of lower, illusory material world, but individual soul is not dissociated. It fully reflects God, as it is made in his image. This gives individual soul a greater reality that transcends the material, and even though material reality is just a temporary story, Individual soul participates in this story not by being illusory dissociated alter, but by being a fully realized reflection of the whole. The imitation of God, or becoming like Christ, is, as Carl Jung theorized, the individual's journey that each soul must realize through life before it unites with God. Christ is a perfect reflection of God in man, and each individual soul, just like Christ, is made in God's image. So although my view is similar to that of Dr. Bernardo Kastrup, my view is more holistic, while his view is more naturalistic. Bernardo Kastrup would agree with me on the grounds that we are not truly separate. Our seemingly separate minds are actually one mind that appears as many. Our lives are stories of images on the screen, but there is only one light that makes these stories appear on the screen, and this light comes from God. Therefore, there is no separation. Each subject is actually one. But this does not mean that there are no multiple souls. As I said, soul is not an illusory dissociated alter. It is a reflection of eternity. So even though there are multiple subjects, there is only one subject that makes them real. All subjects are one, and this is exactly what makes them eternal. However, in our temporary world of change and decay, we are unable to perceive this reality, that all of us are actually one. Instead, we are deceived by the devil, the false light. We think we know we need to compete against others, while actually the opposite is true. The well-being of others is at the same time our own well-being. When we act against each other, we live in hell, while when we act as one, we live in paradise. In the heavens where God dwells with his angels, everyone is in perfect harmony, and even though they are many, they all act as one, because they see they all depend on one light that comes from the throne of God. Since all living beings participate in this harmonious order, the closer we get in reflecting the perfect harmony in heaven, closer we are to God. The Bible refers to Elohim as plural when referring to God, as one of the Psalms says, Elohim hath taken his place in the mighty assembly, in the midst of the Elohim he is judging. Because God is literally at the same time one and many, there is no contradictions here, only it is important to give priority to unity, because multiplicity can only appear in unity, it is always subordinate to unity. Many would say that this is a contradiction. How can one thing be many? Either it is one or it is many. But I don't see the logic of this. I see one thing being many in various different forms in reality, especially if we see reality from a Platonic perspective as I do. As we know, Plato would say that each entity participates in Platonic idea. For example, there is idea of the angels, then there are multiple species of angels participating in the idea of angels. Each species of angels has its individual entities. Then there is the soul of the world. The earth itself has a soul, and in it there are the souls of various species, animals, humans, plants. Each species is like a subcategory of the world soul and is made from the specific meaningful expressions of this world soul. So the world soul contains the soul of animals, humans, and plants. All these souls are actually one soul, but at the same time they are many, and each of these individual souls contains multiple subcategories of various species and individual souls within each of these species. Each soul participates in its environment. Each environment is part of the greater environment of the planet. Each planet is part of solar system, galaxy, the universe. This is how everything in reality is. It is just the nature of reality that everything participates in everything. Each individual entity is itself a unity that participates in multiplicity with other unities of the same nature, and itself contains multiplicity of multiple individual entities of which each of them is unity, and further contains multiplicity, and itself participates in multiplicity that is part of a greater unity. Unity and multiplicity are not separate concepts. They are two sides of the same coin, two expressions of the same reality, like yin and yang, and both are expressions of God. God is the ultimate unity that contains all unity and multiplicity, but God himself isn't even unity. He is above even this. God is what makes unity possible. It is just the nature of reality that one thing can be many, or in other words, that many things can participate in one thing or be an expression of its oneness. And even though this is the case, oneness is not diminished by this multiplicity. It is, in fact, that its multiplicity is exactly the crucial part that makes it one. In this temporary world, on the screen where reality appears, we see the story of multiple subjects, while in the true reality of light, there is only the subject, one light that shines where reality appears, and creates the story of many minds, from one true mind. Feeling of dissociation and ego or false self emerges from illusion of separation and misunderstanding of individuality. True individuality is not a feeling of multiple separate individuals. True individuality is a realization of true nature of reality as one singular individuality that we all possess. This does not mean that we are not separate individuals. We are, but at the same time, we are all one individuality. Individuals can be separate, but the thing that makes them two separate individuals is the same and contains both of them within itself. This is true individuality. Each individual comes from reality and is sustained by reality. We are all one reality, one individuality. This is why Jesus says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength." The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. Loving God and loving your neighbor is the greatest commandment. Both are the greatest, meaning one is not greater than the other. It is not just love God, because one who loves God but hates his neighbor actually hates God. As that quote from the beginning of the video says, one who loves God must love his brother as well. It is a must, because God is in everything and everyone. To love God we must love everyone. If we hate even a single person, even the most evil person you could think of, we hate God. Every person is made in God's image and fully reflects God's individuality. When a priest speaks to people in the church, he calls them brothers and sisters, for we are all united in God. This is why there are multiple individuals, but one single individuality that comes from God. Being the individual is exactly how it feels to be like God. Every person has its thoughts and experiences. Just like God, our feeling of being an individual is not an illusion. Each one of us is at the same time the entire reality. Separation is real when seen through the lens of each individual, but when seen through the eyes of God, I am absolutely certain that each of us has the same nature. There is one thing, and that same thing is the thing that makes us all alive. Schopenhauer said that there is only one center of awareness, one eye that looks out from every individual. But this does not mean the eye itself is an illusion, only that separation is. The eye remains real, and it looks through each and every one of us. Individuality is not an illusion, but the very nature of reality. What we call individuality is not an illusion, but a misunderstanding. We think of individuals as separate, yet to be an individual is precisely how it feels to be one with the whole. The whole is an individual, and each new life is made in His image. We are literally God's image, and by creating His image He gave us the ability to mimic all His abilities, albeit from a lower level of being. So just as God creates, we have the ability to procreate ourselves, and just as God creates His image, we too can do the same. As this quote from the Bible states, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made He him, male and female created He them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam, in the day when they were created. And Adam lived 130 years, and begot a son in his own likeness, after his image, and called his name Seth." Genesis 5 verses 1 to 3. In this passage, Seth is introduced as Adam's third son, born after the tragedy of Abel's murder, and he represents the continuation of humanity's godly lineage. His birth is described as being in Adam's likeness, after his image, which emphasizes both the transmission of human identity and the theological idea of humanity bearing the image of God. And since we are made in God's image, our individual souls are eternal, just like God. Wisdom of Solomon 2:23 states, "For God created man to be immortal, and made him to be an image of his own eternity." Let's carefully observe what this means. It says the image of his own eternity. So eternity of each soul depends on the eternity of God. Each soul exists in eternity because it participates in the eternity of God. I want to point out that even though we seem separated from each other, we are all united in God. And this fact is what actually makes us more real than if it were the fact that we are each separate individuals, living in our own separate minds and bodies. The fact that separation is an illusion is exactly what gives each soul eternal life in God. Individual can never be dissolved. It is the ultimate reality, the one, and each one of us is fully realized one, completely merged with the whole, without separation. That is the source of everything, the one, the good, or God, and reality and everything within it is a reflection in the light that God shines into nothingness, and from nothing creates everything by casting this light that allows us to think. As Plato says, the good is not the truth, it is the source of truth, it is above even the truth, it is to mind what the physical light is to the eyes, it is the light of the mind that allows us to see. Our individuality is like a radio station tuning into the waves of a greater broadcast. We are not separated from this light, just as waves are not separate from the ocean. We often assume that for each new mind to exist, it must be fragmented from the mind of God, as though experience must be divided up and distributed. But I believe this is a flawed way of thinking about the nature of God, just like it would be wrong to say that waves are separate from the ocean. If individual is the whole, then all individuals are the whole, just like all waves are the ocean. It is simply the nature of God that each new life, upon coming into being, possesses its own center of attention. God is not constrained by rules of quantity, space, or time. He does not need to split himself into pieces to create new life. He simply welcomes it. Each individual consciousness is not a fragment, but a fully realized center of experience within the whole. We struggle to conceive of a reality where multiple minds exist within one mind without division, because we mistakenly apply our understanding of physical reality to the metaphysical. But in a purely mental realm, there is no need for fragmentation or separation. This is where I draw from the philosophy of Gottfried Leibniz, who was also a kind of idealist. He proposed monads as fundamental substance of reality, and God as the supreme monad, or mind, as the source of all other monads. What I like about his philosophy is that he has the best explanation of how multiplicity appears from unity, like how multiple individual souls, or monads, participate in unity with the supreme monad or God. Leibniz argued, against Newton, that space, time, and motion are completely relative. As for my own opinion, I have said more than once that I hold space to be something merely relative, as time is, that I hold it to be an order of coexistences, as time is an order of successions. Einstein, who called himself a Leibnizian, wrote in the introduction to Max Jammer's book Concepts of Space that Leibnizianism was superior to Newtonianism, and his ideas would have dominated over Newton's had it not been for the poor technological tools of the time. Joseph Agassiz argues that Leibniz paved the way for Einstein's theory of relativity. The rules of time and space that govern our physical perceptions do not apply in the realm of mind. What we perceive as separate selves are not truly divided, but rather expressions of a unity that does not diminish as new life emerges. Leibniz, in his monadology, says that each monad reflects the whole, and this is a crucial principle that I recently added in my understanding of idealism, and now I want to explain how I see these reflections. Every organism, every center of awareness, is a reflection of this whole, differing only in the degree of perfection with which it mirrors reality. Reality is mind, the realm of ultimate rationality and harmony. However, not all beings partake in this reality with the same level of clarity. Our ability to reflect the whole is determined by our degree of understanding, which we attain through contemplation. Just as large objects take up more space in the physical world, in the mental world, understanding is the measure of how large we truly are. Our actions and decisions are direct expressions of our understanding, and more understanding means better alignment with reality, knowing what is good and what is bad, possessing more knowledge, knowing which actions benefit us and those around us. Everything we create, everything we build, the way we see the world, the way we feel, the way we respond, all of this is an expression of our understanding. God's mind represents the ultimate, perfect understanding of everything, an unattainable ideal. Nevertheless, each of us, even the smallest bacterium, is a complete reflection of the whole. It may seem paradoxical to say that there is only one mind, yet multiple points of understanding. But this is because we dogmatically assert our opinions, and we apply the laws we observe in material reality, such as spatial separation, multiple positions, divisions, and so on. Therefore, we believe that multiple different perspectives must necessarily mean multiple minds. However, if we accept that reality is mental, then we must apply mental laws to explain how it functions. Separation, in this view, is not spatial but exists only in the form of differing degrees of understanding. When I speak of understanding, I do not mean merely knowing how to solve a mathematical equation or perform an intellectual task. Understanding, in my philosophy, is living. It is not simply knowledge, but the source from which knowledge arises. It is a living synthesis of ideas, experiences, and feelings, a dynamic mental structure rather than a static piece of information. Earlier, I described fear as an idea that exists almost like a reality of its own, an archetypal form in the mental realm that contains the patterns and meanings of fear. In the same way, every human being, or every intellect, is also an archetypal form, a compartment of meanings and patterns from which our entire being emerges. Every soul, every idea, and every meaning functions as an archetype within this mental realm. Humanity as a whole is one archetype, a vast structure of patterns and meanings. Within it, individual humans are themselves sub-archetypes, each shaped by their own unique configuration of those patterns. These should not be imagined as physical compartments, but as mental or spiritual structures that emanate from the mind of God. Everything that exists imitates these archetypal forms. In fact, there is nothing that is not an archetype. Instead of thinking of Jungian archetypes as abstract psychological concepts, one should recognize oneself as an archetype, because all of reality is composed of these archetypal mental structures. Some manifest physically, some remain without appearance, but all arise from the particular combination of meaningful patterns that define them. I, for example, am an archetype made up of countless interwoven patterns, shape, texture, feelings, behaviors, each a smaller compartment within the wider mental realm. All of these compartments interact and influence one another. There are endless archetypes and an endless number of archetypal structures within them. As Plato said, there are forms within forms. Every form is itself an archetype, containing within it countless other forms and countless possible combinations. It is impossible to capture or fully explain this, because the combinations of forms and archetypal structures are infinite. Yet all of them ultimately originate from the intellect of God, the source of all other intellects. This is why every intellect is said to be made in God's image, because it is literally a reflection of that supreme mind. What I call understanding is one such archetypal structure, the total configuration of an individual soul's intellectual capacities. But by intellectual capacities, I mean something far broader than rational thought alone. Understanding includes desires, feelings, impulses, and every force that shapes our inner life and expresses itself through us. This expanded understanding is how each living being mirrors God, the supreme mind and the origin of all others. Humans, for example, share a similar level of comprehension, which is why we experience reality in comparable ways, possessing similar cognitive abilities and perceptions. Animals, on the other hand, exist at a lower level of understanding. They lack the depth of self-reflection that humans possess, yet I believe they still have some degree of it. If we, as reflections of the whole, possess self-awareness, then all sentient beings must possess it to some extent. The difference lies in the complexity of their self-reflection. Animals do not form intricate thoughts as we do, but this does not mean they lack self-awareness entirely. Even within the human species, individuals vary in their capacity for self-reflection and understanding. The entire spectrum of existence, from the simplest life forms to the most enlightened minds, reflects the same fundamental reality, each according to its own degree of perfection. Understanding is the sum of all mental capabilities, and it is this, not our bodies, nor even individual minds, that makes each of us unique. In physical reality, separation is drawn by separation in spatial positions, while in mental realm, where everything is constructed by embodying certain collections of ideas, then every being that collects or embodies such ideas does that by understanding. Understanding is much broader than what we usually think. If you truly reflect on your ability to understand things, you will see that it is not merely rational. There is a degree of intuitive capacities that play a role. As in Orphic mythology and Plato's philosophy, it is not sufficient to turn solely up toward the light of heavens, to Apollo, that is, toward rationality and intellectual clarity. One must also descend into the underworld and confront Dionysus, to face the depths of passion, desire, and inner conflict, and to reconcile these forces within the soul. Reason and passion must be brought into harmony. The lover of wisdom is therefore not one who is merely rational, but one who is also passionately devoted to truth. In Plato's thought, the ascent toward true light, the escape from the cave, cannot be achieved through reason alone. The soul itself must be properly ordered and unified. Apollo and Dionysus must be joined. Only then can the soul rise beyond illusion and participate in the divine banquet, feasting among the gods. Thus, it is clear that wisdom, or understanding, is not merely reason and knowledge, it is at the same time feeling and desire. To know at the same time means to feel. It is truly impossible to fully understand how and why we understand things, because we don't just understand them, in the superficial sense of the word, it goes deeper, into very structure of our being. We embody our understanding, we literally live it. We are not separate minds producing independent thoughts. Rather, we are a collection of meaningful patterns, a mental structure emanating from the mind of God, like an avatar in the dream, and our understanding is how we function and perform all our tasks within reality. Understanding is the source of all actions, all thoughts, and all our personal inner interpretations of events and experiences. It is our ability to be an independent entity, by contemplating and reflecting the light of the mind that comes from God. Each soul is its intellect, a center of intellectual capability within the single mind. When I have two different ideas in my mind, or when I imagine two characters in my dream, they are not spatially separated in two different spatial positions. I just have the understanding of meaning created by my mind. There is a meaning of one idea, the other idea, or the meaning of two separate characters in my dream standing in two separate places, but in reality they are just in one place, in my mental space or imagination. Everything is just meaningful patterns imagined and recognized or understood by the mind. The outside reality is at the same time the inside. There is no inside or outside. These are materialistic, spatial terms. In mental realm, inside and outside are completely indistinguishable. God, as the highest intellect, is defined not by spatial or material attributes, nor by being a spiritual entity of another dimension, but solely by his perfect understanding. His omniscience is not an effortful process of thought. He simply knows all things, effortlessly and instantaneously. He does not need to deliberate or reason. His knowledge is absolute, timeless, and complete. He knows the future as naturally as the present, not because he foresees it as an external event, but because his perfect understanding encompasses all things at once. God's immortality is not a consequence of any structural or inherent indestructibility, for such notions belong to the realm of material existence, which does not apply to a purely mental reality. Instead, his eternal nature is a direct result of his perfect intellect. He is beyond decay or change because his knowledge is perfect and infinite. His mind is the source of all ideas, the eternal repository of truth, what Plato called the realm of forms. Reality, then, is nothing but this one vast mind, and we, each of us, are perspectives within it. What sets us apart is not an illusory individuality, nor a private realm of thought, but the degree of our understanding. The greater our intellect, the closer we come to reflecting the whole. God, as the source of all understanding, stands as the perfect, undivided intellect, the ultimate and eternal being. I am not certain whether Plato or the Neoplatonists would fully agree with my description of individuality and the mind of God, but their philosophy is where I draw the most inspiration. My view remains deeply connected to Platonic thought, though I have given it my own twist to fit my understanding of idealism. Plato described the good, or the one, as perfect rationality and harmony. To grasp this divine intellect, we must escape the cave. We must transcend illusion to recognize the perfection of the absolute mind. According to the Symposium, if one could achieve understanding of beauty itself, one would attain immortality. I agree with this, But Plato also asserts that such understanding is impossible for mortals. However, this impossibility does not arise from our mortality itself, but from the limits of our intellect. Our understanding is what defines us, what makes us who we are. It is our understanding that shapes our perception of the world and determines our place within it. Consider human civilization compared to the animal kingdom. Our societies are vastly more advanced, and this difference is entirely due to differences in understanding. It is not material conditions that shape intellect, but rather intellect that determines how the material world appears. As Plotinus said, the universe itself is an act of contemplation. The entire world is an unfolding of divine intellect. Understanding comes first. Intellect precedes all appearances, which then arrange themselves accordingly. This is how we must see all things. Understanding is the true source of individuality. What appears as separate persons is, in reality, different points of view within the one mind. And what separates us into different souls is nothing but God's understanding that sustains reality, and simply with his divine mind has a grasp of everything at once, and thus understands the nature of every soul, the fact that they are distinct entities, and everything else in reality. Our personal minds are reflections of God's ability to understand. The meaning of what is happening in reality is God understanding the nature of the universe, the shape of stars, the texture of stone, the behavior of animals and humans, the fact that we are distinct entities. All these things are nothing but meaning that emerges from the power of divine mind and its infinite capacity for understanding everything that could possibly happen. Because everything that happens is just an expression of its intelligence. Let's say you could imagine the universe in your thoughts. Everything that happens in this universe in your imagination is a consequence of your understanding. Of course, your thoughts and knowledge are templates that you use to create this reality. These are Platonic ideas, and the reality that you imagine is a temporary expression, a reflection of your ideas. In this way, I personally understand God's relationship with reality. However, we could never imagine how it is to understand everything like God does, but this is the analogy and shows how we can imitate God, because we are made in his image. Imagine a vast pool of water, with each soul as a drop of rain falling into it. Each drop, as it touches the surface, merges seamlessly with the whole, becoming indistinguishable from the rest of the water. This pool represents existence itself, and the falling rain symbolizes new souls coming into being. Yet, though each drop disappears into the pool, it does not lose itself. It becomes the whole while still retaining what makes it unique, its understanding. Understanding is how each drop blends into the pool, and it is the expression of its participation in the water. Each drop is, at the same time, the entire pool. God is the place that sustains itself, the environment that produces rain. He defines the pool, each drop, and the movement of the water. It may seem difficult to conceive of different perspectives without some form of separation. Yet, in the realm of mind, nothing exists but the whole and its understanding. Some might argue that there must be some boundary where each intellect begins and ends. But in a purely mental reality, there is no need for such division, because everything is intellect itself. The faculties of the mind are the very essence of the soul. They are our way of existing within the divine mind. Through them, we reflect God's perfection in our own unique way. Yet even these faculties do not belong to us alone. They are sustained by God, drawn from his infinite understanding. As Nikola Tesla once said, "My brain is only a receiver in the universe. There is a core from which we obtain knowledge, strength, and inspiration. Our soul is not a separate entity with its own independent existence, but rather a fully merged part of the divine mind. However, our understanding remains ours alone, and this is the very proof of the soul. To understand this, imagine God's mind as a great room filled with mirrors. Each soul is a reflection in one of those mirrors, an image of divine perfection seen through the limits of its own imperfect understanding. God, in his perfect intellect, is the room itself. He is the mirrors, the reality that makes all reflections possible. The souls are not separate objects. They exist only because God's mind reflects and allows itself to be reflected. Each living being is a reflection of God, but no reflection can ever be as real or eternal as that which it reflects. The reflections strive to mirror God, yet their understanding is never complete, and thus they remain mere images, existing only through God's power. He alone holds the ability to reflect and be reflected, shaping the world and every soul within it through the boundless depth of his knowledge. Since God is eternal, the reflections, or souls, are images in this eternity. God can sustain them indefinitely or destroy them in an instant, since all of them depend upon him. I am not denying multiplicity in nature. I am not claiming that we do not exist as distinct beings. Clearly, we do. We act as separate agents and experience ourselves as individuals. However, I give primacy to unity, because unity is more real than multiplicity. It is the condition that makes multiplicity possible in the first place. Our individual state cannot be as real as the eternal state that makes it possible. Individuality cannot surpass the reality of its source. No matter how many beings exist, or how independent they appear, all are unified within the eternity of oneness. I do not deny this world, nor the presence of multiple agents within it. On the contrary, I believe that grounding multiplicity in unity gives temporary beings a more profound reality than if everything were isolated, fragmented, and fleeting. Unity is not the negation of difference. It is its foundation. Plato, thinkers within his academy, and later the Neoplatonists believed that even stars and planets are alive. From my perspective, this may indeed be true. I hold that everything is, in some sense, life itself. What we call dead matter is not the absence of life, but a consequence or projection of life. Rupert Sheldrake, a contemporary thinker, has suggested that the sun itself may be conscious. I do not claim to know whether this is true, but I see no reason to dismiss the possibility. If it were true, it would not surprise me. We are not fundamentally separate from anything in reality. Everything is an excitation of meaningful patterns within the supreme mind. Nothing is rigidly isolated. Everything is intertwined, merged, yet still distinct. Human beings possess agency. Plants also possess agency, memory, responsiveness, and behavior, though each expresses these capacities differently. Life unfolds along a spectrum. Just as plant life differs from human life yet remains fully alive, planets and stars may also possess forms of life appropriate to their mode of being. Planets are not inert objects. They are in constant motion, radiating energy, interacting with stars and with one another. The Earth itself has a magnetic core that generates a vast field extending into space. We are not separate from the Earth. We breathe because the Earth itself breathes. Every organism fits precisely within Earth's living system. We are not alive on the Earth. We are alive with the Earth. Our life and the Earth's life are not two separate things. Solar systems, stars, and planets exhibit behavior patterns reminiscent of living organisms, not human thought or intention, but expressions of life appropriate to their scale and nature. Nothing in reality is fundamentally different in substance, because everything is made not of inert matter, but of meaning. There may also exist forces invisible to us that possess agency of their own. We experience their influence from our particular position within the spectrum of meaning, limited by our frequency of perception. Gravity, the laws of nature, the movement of celestial bodies, even phenomena such as fortune, misfortune, or sudden mental illness, may be manifestations of living forces operating on levels not directly accessible to our senses. This is how angels and demons should be understood, as living beings within the mind of God, operating on a higher, purer spectrum of meaning, closer to Platonic forms themselves. They exist nearer to God in terms of agency, power, clarity, and understanding. Their texture, essence, and mode of thought differ from ours, yet they remain living agents within the same reality, acting on a different plane of being. Because of their proximity to the forms, they may perceive reality more directly and, within limits allowed by God, influence it to a greater degree. Like all beings, they are expressions or reflections of God's thought, but their position in the hierarchy of meaning grants them greater impact. Just as some ideas occupy our mind more powerfully than others, so too, within the divine intellect, certain expressions of mental states resonate more strongly than others. Carl Jung writes, "When we assume God to be a guiding principle, well, sure enough, a God is usually characteristic of a certain system of thought or morality. For instance, take the Christian God, the summum bonum. God is love, love being the highest moral principle, and God is spirit, the spirit being the supreme idea of meaning. All our Christian moral concepts derive from such assumptions, and the supreme essence of all of them is what we call God. Everything that exists is a movement within the living mind of God, unified, meaningful, alive, appearing as many, yet never truly divided. Reality is structured as a hierarchy, with God at its summit, yet even unity itself, oneness, is below God, because unity is made possible by Him. God is not simply the highest being within existence. He transcends existence altogether. If we imagine hierarchy in the shape of a pyramid, God is not merely the peak. He is the point at which the pyramid itself ends. He stands beyond essence, beyond form, as the absolute ground that makes all hierarchy possible. This is the foundation of Christian metaphysics. Everything must be understood hierarchically, with God as the source. Everything beneath Him exists along a spectrum of being composed of mental states, expressions of God's capacity to think. Reality, as an imitation of God's thoughts, unfolds as a vast range of archetypal expressions, each reflecting different degrees and qualities of meaning. Human beings, animals, and plants exist at different levels, or frequencies, within this spectrum. Yet we are not as far apart as appearances might suggest. Because the meaningful patterns that define us are expressed in similar ways at our shared position on the spectrum, we can interact with one another. We share comparable textures and densities, bones, skin, and bodily presence within space. These similarities allow for mutual recognition and interaction. Even within the animal kingdom, there is an enormous range of expression. Some sea creatures possess radically different textures. Some have no bones, some are transparent, almost invisible to the human eye, some are microscopic, others enormous. There may be countless organisms we cannot perceive, because of their size, environment, or the limits of our senses. We still do not know how deeply life extends beneath the earth, nor how many species remain undiscovered in the oceans. Life itself is a spectrum of meaningful expressions, different states of being, behaviors, and capacities. Plants share many similarities with animals and humans, and exist on a nearby frequency of meaning. They differ, however, in how those meanings are expressed. Their texture and structure are distinct, yet they share a similar level of density and presence in the world. Plant behavior, though unlike animal movement, is nonetheless expressive. Plants move through growth, orientation toward light, and modes of nourishment. Even within plant life, there is a spectrum of complexity. Fungi, for example, can act as messengers between plants. They feed on them while simultaneously enabling communication among them. Through such networks, plants cooperate, share resources, warn one another, and sometimes compete. Some support each other, others inhibit growth. Plant ecosystems form intricate living communities in which individual organisms contribute to the functioning of the whole, much like animal groups and human societies. Although we are closer to animals than to plants on this spectrum, even plant life reveals recognizable similarities. Plants require nourishment and water. They grow, depend on sunlight, warmth, and air, just as we do. These shared necessities reveal our participation in a common field of meaning. We exist on similar frequencies within the broader spectrum of mental states, each expressing those states in distinct but related ways. All of life, in its countless forms, is a layered expression of meaning unfolding within the hierarchy of being, grounded ultimately in the mind of God. Just as certain constellations of traits within the collective consciousness form Jungian archetypes, the fool, the trickster, the mother, each soul is likewise defined by a particular combination of patterns. Jungian archetypes themselves are collections of meaningful structures associated with symbolic representations of human behavior, traits, and actions. In a similar way, every living being in reality is a reflection of meaningful patterns, both physical and psychological, that are instantiated within the world through the casting of God's light. When you possess an understanding of shapes, textures, and behaviors, and you dream of a world that contains these traits, your dream becomes a reflection of your own thoughts. In the same way, reality itself is a reflection of God's thoughts, what Plato called the forms. Your understanding of shapes and behaviors determines the people and surroundings that appear in your dream, just as God's understanding shapes reality itself. This is why human beings possess creative capacity. Our ability to create arises from our capacity to understand and to think. We are made in God's image, and therefore we reflect this creative power, though God's understanding and intellect operate on a level that is beyond imagination. In this sense, God's understanding of human psychology can be conceived as a collection of archetypal patterns, much like Jungian archetypes. Each human psyche expresses these archetypes by reflecting God's thoughts in a particular way. From this perspective, Platonic ideas and Jungian archetypes are far more closely connected than they initially appear. Platonic forms possess ontological status. They concern what is, while Jungian archetypes express psychological symbolism. But if reality itself is the projection of mind, then ontology and psychology, the nature of reality and the nature of humanity, are ultimately the same. As discussed earlier, the material world should be understood as an abstraction that represents a deeper realm of ideas. From this, we can see that even physical characteristics, shape, size, texture, are symbolic expressions of that underlying realm, just as Jungian archetypes are symbolic expressions of psychological meaning. Each object, through its form and qualities, evokes a particular state of mind, just as each behavior or feeling does. These experiences are not disconnected. In the same way that understanding shapes our behavior, it also shapes how we encounter physical objects. Material things are not merely inert matter. They are forms of experience, expressions of thought, carriers of meaning. The traits and meanings of material objects leave impressions on the mind that are deeply connected to our psychological life. This connection between the physical and the psychological is evident in symbolism. We associate sadness or melancholy with physical traits like deformed shape or dark colors, gray, black, while joy evokes lighter colors such as yellow or green. Deep or profound emotions are often expressed through blue, the sea, or the sky. Thus physical qualities become symbols through which psychological states are expressed. Sound or music is another great example where we can connect experience and feeling to shapes and numbers that make physical reality. Harmony emerges from the harmonic series, where overtones follow simple integer multiples of a fundamental frequency. These relationships can be visualized geometrically as spirals, lattices, or fractal patterns, revealing how musical consonance is a form of ordered structure rather than arbitrary sensation. Tools such as the tonics translate harmonic relationships into spatial grids, allowing intervals and chord progressions to be seen as movements through geometric space. Further grounding this connection, physical experiments like Chladni patterns show sound directly generating geometric forms, making audible vibration visible as structure. A clear way to understand the convergence is this. Music is ratio in motion, geometry is ratio in space, and cycles form the bridge between them. Pythagoras, by experimenting with vibrating strings, observed that harmony arises when string lengths relate by whole number proportions. The octave corresponds to a ratio of 2:1, the fifth to 3:2, the fourth to 4:3. Sound, in other words, obeys number. What the ear perceives as consonants, the mind can understand as numerical relationship. Music thus became audible mathematics, and mathematics, silent music. For the Pythagoreans, this correspondence was not accidental. Number was regarded as the archetype of order itself, and geometry was number extended into space. Harmony, whether musical or spatial, emerged wherever proportion governed relation. Just as pleasing sounds arise from ordered ratios in time, beauty in form arises from ordered relations in space. Music and geometry were therefore parallel manifestations of a deeper rational structure permeating nature. This reasoning extended beyond human instruments to the cosmos itself. The Pythagoreans believed that the heavens are governed by the same numerical principles that produce musical harmony. The motions of the planets, arranged according to mathematical proportion, were thought to give rise to a perpetual, though inaudible, harmony, the music of the spheres. This cosmic music was not sound in the ordinary sense, but an expression of perfect order, a harmony apprehended by intellect rather than by the senses. The sirens, whose song was said to uphold cosmic harmony, symbolized this eternal, ordering music that binds the world together. Within this framework, music held great ethical and psychological significance. The Pythagoreans believed that because music is structured by number, and because the soul itself is ordered by number, music possesses the power to modify the soul directly. Just as medicine restores balance to the body, music restores harmony to the inner life. In the same way music, or sound, in other words, physical vibrations, extend their influence into the realm of shapes and numbers, and also into the realm of soul. When we imagine Jungian archetype, or symbolic expression of human behaviors, it naturally invokes some physical characteristics that express its meaning. The physical and the psychological are bound together through symbolism, both emerging from the same underlying realm of ideas. The fool archetype evokes images of clown-like behavior, laughter, naivete, and innocence. The wise old man appears as an elderly figure with a long beard and a serious demeanor. The child suggests youthful features. The mother evokes womanly characteristics. Although these archetypes have no literal physical bodies, we intuitively associate them with physical traits that express their meaning. What I am saying is that the entire physical world is built from these archetypal, mental structures within the mind of the universe. Some structures manifest as visible forms, some appear large or small, some are more tangible, while others remain hidden because their nature does not require visibility. Reality is layered with countless meaningful expressions of countless archetypal templates. We, as individuals, are one such layered expression, a unique combination of meaningful patterns forming a single mental structure, instantiated in this reality as one person among many. This is how the entire world, and every being within it, emerges from mental states. We are expressions of the light God casts, while God is the source of that light, the ground upon which reality appears. Everything that occurs, everything that exists, is ultimately a reflection of this divine light. As I have already mentioned, and repeat now because it is essential, when viewed from a subjective, personal perspective, a mental state appears as feelings, sensations, and thoughts. Yet when we speak objectively, from the standpoint of the subject observing reality, a mental state is a meaningful pattern, a texture, a shape, a smell, a color, a size. Once we understand the world as mental rather than physical, physical structures can no longer serve as the fundamental explanation of reality. They can be used as analogies, but they should not be taken as the actual constituents of existence. Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious provides a compelling illustration of this mental structure. Humanity possesses a collective memory as a whole, but within it are subcollectives. The collective memory of a nation, a family, a school of thought, a religious group, or a secret society, these are compartments within the larger whole. Mental space is not divided according to physical boundaries. It is divided by meaning, by meaningful patterns that define a family, a nation, a culture, or humanity itself. The boundaries of meaning are what structure reality. Consider the example of a mountain. Its shape is pure meaning that is experienced directly, while its material appearance is an abstraction produced by interpreting a meaningful collision of various archetypal instantiations within the universal mind. The mountain embodies many archetypes of size and form: the size of the whole mountain, the size of half of it, the shape of the whole, the shape of a part. It contains the number of trees, the shape of each tree, the size of every branch, the texture of each leaf, the smell of the grass. All of these are countless archetypal compartments interwoven, each whole containing its parts, and each part containing its own sub-patterns and sub-meanings. This is just one illustration of how a single meaningful pattern, instantiated as the mountain, is only a tiny visible expression of an infinite, invisible structure. Within its very being lie endless combinations of meaningful patterns that make it what it is, an experienced idea of a mountain in universal consciousness. Humanity is structured in the same way. Humanity is the whole. Individuals are parts. Each individual has further parts. The form of their arms, legs, head, and the parts within those parts, these are all pure meaningful patterns. The soul has its psychological traits, expressed as behavior. Each behavior contains habits. Each habit is influenced by situations. None of this is the result of mechanical physical functions, as materialism claims. Everything is an expression of one process only, the mind of God, who casts the light of mind onto the blank screen of nothingness, and the reflections of this light are reflecting the forms, bringing something out of nothing. These reflected forms generate countless archetypal compartments of meaning, and from these, reality arises. Through God's power to illuminate the void, the entire realm of thought and life comes into being as a single living whole that appears divided into many parts. What differentiates each soul is its unique archetypal expression of the forms, its particular reflection of God's light and God's perfect understanding, or intellect. I realize that what I am describing may sound complicated, but it is only because I am trying to address the nuances of this worldview. Every worldview is complex. So complex, in fact, that it is impossible to explain all of its details exhaustively. Yet materialism is even more complicated, because its apparent simplicity hides enormous gaps. It leaves holes that cannot be filled, contradictions that make no sense. It is superficial in its errors, yet extraordinarily convoluted when attempting to explain reality. In many ways, it is an insult to human intelligence that we have remained under the illusion of this worldview for so long. If we do not awaken from this illusion, it will lead to consequences we cannot escape. Thought shapes reality, our behavior, our worldview, and ultimately the world we create. If we continue to believe in a dead reality, where life is an artificial construction, then we will eventually build a dead, artificial world. In such a world, being alive will be indistinguishable from being dead. Everything will become lifeless, and yet we will believe we have attained eternal life. But this artificial eternity will be a deception, a false light, ruled by Lucifer. In this scenario, we would create on earth the very hell born from our own knowledge and intelligence. However, this cannot be true knowledge. True knowledge aligns with God's will and supports life, while knowledge that opposes God and destroys life is false knowledge. It is a lie. The serpent tricked us into struggle against our own well-being. False knowledge is knowledge that brings harm. This means that knowledge of this kind is actually ignorance. The devil always turns everything on its head. He presents lies as truth, and ignorance as knowledge. Just as the devil rebelled against God and failed, we would repeat the same pattern, seeking to replace the true source of life with an artificial imitation. Lucifer appears powerful, capable, and knowledgeable, and this gives him the illusion that he can oppose God. But he does not understand that everything he does is permitted only because God allows it. This is why he is a false light. All true light comes from one source, God. Every other light is merely an imitation, a reflection in a mirror rather than the reality itself. Because it cannot stand on its own, it must borrow power from God to exist at all. Yet it still attempts to challenge the very source that sustains it. How could Lucifer win? He cannot, by fighting against God. He fights against himself, because his very being depends on the light he tries to overthrow. Since Lucifer exists on a lower plane of being than God, he can influence and even rule over humans, for we too exist on this lower plane, within the realm of reflections. And when Lucifer begins to rule over these reflections, and we begin to follow him, as we already are, we assist him in his attempt to replace God as the source of light. But because God is the only true source of light, when Lucifer cuts himself off from God in his effort to become the ruler, he becomes entirely false, lightless, ruling over darkness. Having rejected the true source, he extinguishes himself, and we, by following him, would do the same. We replace God with our ego, truth with illusion, and life with artifice, ultimately with death. If we create this hell on earth, we will find ourselves trapped in the very falsehood we have embraced. The devil will gather the souls of humanity, and we will remain imprisoned within our own selfish illusions, burning in the darkness we created. In the realm of truth, to understand means to see, while in the realm of shadows and illusions, physical sight is considered the ultimate expression of understanding. Physical sight is what truth looks like, but true understanding means realizing that the experience of this comes from within, from the mind and soul that is connected to God, who is the one that makes everything and nothing. Being alive is to live in God, but to see God, one must die and become nothing. This is the ultimate truth and ultimate madness. To understand that to be with the source of all life, the only path is death. Life and death are actually the same thing. Death is a part of life, not the opposite. In trying to escape death, we escape life. To accept life for what it is, with death as part of it, means to accept the truth that God reveals. To live and to die, to be and not to be, both of these are equally true, and both are gifts from God.